Welcome to Enigma of the Unknown. Tonight, we're taking you deep into the heart of Texas, a state brimming with spine-chilling mysteries and haunting tales. From abandoned ghost towns to unsettling encounters in the dead of night, these 6 real-life stories will make you question what truly lies beyond. If you're ready for a journey into the unknown, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another terrifying tale. Now, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Story number 1. Demons of East Texas. My brother and I were Wing Chun instructors on YouTube until we weren't. We were popular, but not Jessica and Jirai or PewDiePie famous. Before the pay structure change, we could have gotten by on our ad revenue alone. Luckily, our jobs as instructors at a local dojo helped us get by when that changed. All right, by local dojo, I mean LA Fitness, and by get by, I mean not miss a rent payment, so neither of us would have turned down extra money or broader exposure. YouTube personalities, you have to understand, are whores. We're positive and bubbly while we're dying inside, gracious without reason, friendly to every jerk in the comments. We swallow all the foul shit the public spurts into us, and then we smile and ask you to. Click those like and subscribe buttons if you appreciated today's content, because every goddamn video is an overly saccharine audition for the next. Every channel and public interaction is a meta-level audition for something better and more stable, because we all started these channels in high school or college and assumed the roller coaster would never end. So why learn a real skill? Why be a productive member of society if I can figure out the SEO for my shitty website? Short of pegging ourselves with one shared pork flesh dildo. How are we not my FreeCams models? When we got the email invitation to a YouTube athlete meetup in Houston to help rebuild homes destroyed in the hurricane, we jumped at it with no questions, no second thoughts. We barely even saw the real request. To us, the words glowed: free advertising and exposure and unlimited heartstring tugs in coruscating neon lights. We ended up a little southwest of Houston in Rockport. It was one of the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Harvey. While we had seen the flooded houses, 1 to 2 feet deep in fetid water, Rockport was something else. Houses weren't flooded because the 170-mile-an-hour winds had reduced them to bare foundation. Nude palm trees and 2x6 beams stood like toothpicks in a tray of country club sandwich hors d'oeuvre. The only sign there had been a fairly modern town standing less than a month prior. Road signs were down, as were apparently cell towers to relay my GPS. We were lost. We breathed a sigh of mixed relief and resignation as the red and blue lights of an Aransas County Sheriff car lit up the dark darker than any time in the last 60 years' night sky. Would we get directions, or was this a racial profiling stop? If you boys are out here to loot, the sheriff said, hitching his pants higher up against his middle-aged beer gut, you're going to be disappointed. No, we're brothers. We're here to meet some colleagues and rebuild a couple houses. I said, oh, I was just Joe Dashed. He twitched an eyebrow. Brothers. This was the reaction I had been hoping for. Just like cam girls got their Johns to fall in love with them and buy them extra gifts. We had learned to milk everyone's awkwardness over not guessing our family ties. Rationally, there was no reason to assume the most leprechaun-looking ginger and the Black Has-a-Cop's nightstick dude with a high-top fade would be related. People who were worried about racial insensitivity, however, were always temporarily irrational. Doug and I were best friends from kindergarten. When my parents died in a car wreck when I was 12, Doug's parents offered to adopt me. Officially becoming my best friend's brother was the only thing that kept me sane. The only thing that kept loneliness from overtaking me. Well, yeah, Doug said. You can't see the family resemblance? The sheriff laughed. Are you lost? As I explained where we were trying to go and our plans for the next week, another car pulled up behind the first. This one, a Harris County SUV, a 7-foot-tall, perfectly tanned guy with a cleft chin and immaculate triangle physique unfolded himself from the driver's seat. From his slightly curly black hair to his shine shoes, he looked like a movie star. He looked like a movie star the way they look in movies, after hair and makeup and wardrobe are finished. The only imperfection was his slight limp. Problem? Officer Handsome asked Officer Paunchy in a low growl. Even as a straight guy, I could have listened to him talk all day. I could only imagine what Doug was dealing with. Nah, just giving these boys some directions. He turned back to us. West to the collapsed jewelry store, then north about 7 blocks. You might have to walk around a bit, but it's one of the warehouses. We should check their IDs, Handsome said, staring directly at me. The stony set of his jaw was starting to make me uneasy. It's all right. They're relief workers. Let's let them get set up for the night. Handsome stared at us in silence for 2 full minutes. Fine. He walked away as the first sheriff wished us a good night. We drove most of the way to the warehouse before Doug turned to me. I know he was a USDA grade A creep nugget, but he was cute. You're a perv. Doug scoffed. If he had been a woman with huge boobs, we'd be having the opposite conversation right now. I didn't say I wasn't a perv. I just said you were, too. All right, fair point. We're talking about the first cop, right? Doug scoffed again. We got out of the rental car and walked towards the large, red brick warehouse. It had taken some damage. The tin roof was peeled back like a sardine tin in a few places, and a wooden porch had collapsed around the back. It was sturdy and habitable, though. We laughed as we knocked on the small metal door next to a giant, rolling metal garage door. That was the last time I would see Doug for days. My memory gets hazy from there, but I remember pain, cold, sweating, drinking water from a dirty sponge to sate my dry throat, holding back heaves as a rancidly cloying ooze was poured onto my tongue, searching for a weak link in my chicken wire cage. I remember very vividly our captors. A topless girl with safety pins jutting through scabby. Infection-reddened punctures from her left nipple to halfway up the left side of her neck wore a goat head mask with moldering brown fur and chipped, though real, horns. She brought the stale bread to me every morning. A second person, I think a man, in a cat's head. Blood dripped from its whiskers the first day. On the second, it had dried. By the third, it had started to rot. I lost track of the days, but the cat mask was never cleaned and the eyes seemed to track me with a dead, glassy stare. The cat never spoke. Last was Asmodeus, a giant, hulking man in a dark robe who barked commands at me and others huddled in their wire prisons. Asmodeus called the cat Baal and the goat Baphomet. He called me little brother number 2. When my head finally cleared from the haze, I was curled on my side. Sawdust, old hair, and dirt caked the spots around my eyes and mouth that had been wetted from sobbing. Little brother number 2. Asmodeus said, "Do you feel the gravity grow in your stomach? Feel the organ threatening to collapse in on itself and consume the waiting flesh?" I nodded. Asmodeus gestured for me to stand, brushing the detritus from my body. I realized I was naked. I was too hungry to care. Asmodeus unlatched my cage and slowly, sensuously curled one finger, bidding me toward him. He produced a long, grime-streaked machete from his cloak and used it to prod me forward, the blade tapping my shoulders and spine when I stumbled or slowed. We walked among the claustrophobic chamber full of other people in cages similar to mine. Asmodeus hunched to avoid hitting his head. Each one was in a different state of hopelessness. One man rocked back and forth, the scent of unchecked urine rising from his hunched body. A woman, a Pilates YouTuber I had stalked on Facebook, kicked at the edges of her cage. Baphomet shocked her with a cattle prod with every blow and laughed orgasmically as the woman howled. The hallway opened into a large room, the ducts and fiberglass insulation, some hanging loose from the ravages of the storm, of the roof were visible 15 feet up. I saw several webcams around the space, noting that they were a high-priced model capable of producing a clear picture even in low light. Asmodeus forced me toward a circular depression in one corner. It looked like it had once been an indoor pool or large hot tub. Maybe the warehouse had been a physical therapy office or gym. Inside were more webcams bolted directly into the concrete and a thin, leathery-skinned man jumping with the tics of withdrawal. "Get in," Asmodeus commanded, as I dropped myself down. He explained our situation. "Drugs." He lifted a needle. "Food." He hefted a can of tuna. testing its weight, then set both on the ground by the edge of the pool. The first one out gets what he wants. The other gets nothing. Bale and Baphomet joined the tall man on either side. Begin. The man came at me before Asmodeus's voice had even finished echoing in my ears. Have you ever heard the term crazy strong? Our bodies can technically powerlift cars. It just comes at the high cost of shattered bones and shredded tendons. So our brains place a limit on how much of our strength we're allowed to use. Some people's brains, however, are flawed in the way we call crazy, so they're not quite as good at regulating that limit. That's how we end up with 100-pound women who can barely be restrained by 3 large male police officers. As it turns out, drug withdrawals can have much the same effect. The man was emaciated and covered with scabs, but he had no trouble knocking me down. I'd like to say I did some cool Karate Kid move to throw him off, but martial arts lose a lot of their effectiveness when your opponent is flailing on top of you, snarling like a rabid animal, punching and knocking your head against the concrete. He was missing a lot of teeth, and many of the ones he had left were broken, but he made good use of them on my forehead. That's right, my forehead. He bit off a piece of my forehead. I didn't even notice until later, when the blood wouldn't stop dripping down my face. I forgot all my training and just kicked my legs and beat him back on pure instinct. I somehow managed to shake him off, but he was right back on me. I kicked his face just as he jumped on me. That stunned him enough to give me time to turn and try to jump up and out of the pool. I managed to get my fingers on the ledge, but the man grabbed my legs and pulled me back. I rolled as far away from him as I could and got on my feet. The man panted, watching me from the other side of the pool, twitching and wiping compulsively at his nose. I took the brief pause to breathe deeply and remember my training. I positioned myself into a stance, watching carefully as he slowly stepped towards me. Here's the thing. I have practiced Wing Chun since Doug and I were chubby little brats. I'm no Chuck Norris, but I've kicked my fair share of ass across several tournaments. I know what I'm doing. Problem is, tournaments have rules and people around to make sure everyone follows the rules. I had a psycho in a ceramic mask and 0 experience actually fighting in a real fight. The kind you win by making sure the other guy won't get back up instead of getting more points. Still, martial arts were meant for self-defense. Surely knowing how to actually fight would be an advantage over the guy throwing blind punches and bites. Right? As it turns out, right. When the tweaker caught his breath and came at me again, I didn't even have to think about it. My hand just surged forward automatically to strike hard at his throat. He fell to his knees and coughed and gasped for breath. Now was my chance. I ran to the wall and jumped up again, pulling myself out of that pool, my face rubbing against the clotted organic goop and hair on the edge that had been left by other fights. A pair of boots came into view. I looked up into the thick, glazed mask, chipped along the edge of one eye, that will forever invoke horror, nausea, and pure hatred every time I see it in my nightmares, or when it flits unbidden through my thoughts. I jumped to my feet and pushed him, hard. I ran as fast as I could, hoping to find an exit from this place. That was the severely flawed plan. Anyway, before I could take more than 2 steps, Baphomet shocked me with the cattle prod and continued to shock me even as my teeth threatened to shatter from the force of my clenching jaw. Someone shrieked, but either me in pain or her in pleasure. Couldn't tell who. When she finally stopped, I could do nothing but twitch, just like my opponent from the pool, and watch as Asmodeus calmly got back up and brushed the dust from his cloak. If you're done letting out your adrenaline, he said, you can choose your reward. I was still trying to remember how to breathe and could only grunt in pain. Baphomet shocked me again. Choose now or you lose your chance. Little brother number 2. Asmodeus said, food or drugs? Even through my pain and confusion, I could feel my stomach twisting itself in hunger. I had no idea how long I'd been here, but I hadn't had a crumb to eat since. Even if it was just a measly can of tuna, food was the logical choice. My situation was bad enough without adding drug withdrawals to the equation. Why would I ever take the other option? Food. I rasped out. Asmodeus gestured for me to stand up. I did, with some difficulty. and Baphomet poked me with the cattle prod. The voltage lowered to something merely uncomfortable, to guide me back to my cell. As I left, I heard the man I'd fought scream, "No, no, I need it. Please, I need it. No, don't take me there again, Triple H. Don't take me there again. No, no." His screams devolved into unintelligible sobs, and the sound of him was cut off entirely as we walked back into the chamber. I thought he was talking about his own cage. I couldn't imagine at the time that there could be a place worse than this for these psychos to put us in. I beg any god that may be out there every day to make me forget there was. I meekly crawled back into my cage, fearful of receiving more shocks. I could tell Baphomet was disappointed I didn't resist. I thought she would shock me anyway, but someone screamed nearby and she decided to torment them instead. I would like to be able to say I am a better person than I was. The truth, though, is that, while I felt bad for whoever was being shocked right now, I was more relieved that it wasn't me. I felt scared for the poor man I fought, but my stomach was forcing me to wonder where the hell my reward was. I did what they wanted. I'd earned it. Where was my food? I don't know how long I waited, but eventually, it did come. Asmodeus knelt in front of my cage, a plate in his hand covered with a cloth napkin. He looked like a waiter at a Venetian carnival celebration from a nightmarish James Ensor painting. "You chose food," he said. "You earned it as your just reward. However, you had a little temper tantrum, didn't you, little brother number 2? So you're getting a special meal." He opened the cage and placed the plate in front of me before locking it again. "Eat it all or you'll be force-fed seconds," he said, and left. I hesitated. The plate was in front of me, the cage so tight it barely fit inside with me. The blue linen napkin hid whatever they expected me to eat. I knew nothing good could be under there. I sniffed the air. It didn't smell like anything, so it couldn't be shit. I touched it lightly. It wasn't warm. Not very much, at least. I noticed something red beginning to stain the napkin. I instantly felt nauseous seeing that. I took several deep breaths, swallowing back the bile trying to crawl its way up my throat. My imagination was conjuring up images of chopped up human organs, goat brains, aborted fetuses, 1,000 horrible things these monsters could have come up with. I had to see what it was. I had to know. I pulled away the napkin. It was a dark-skinned hand, chopped at the wrist, still dripping blood onto the plastic plate. On the side, in the skin between the thumb and the forefinger, was a tattoo of a small mouth with sharp teeth. I would know that tattoo anywhere. They had given me my brother's hand to eat. My immediate reaction was to dry heave, my head swimming, and my heart breaking. My brother no longer had his hand because of these horrific people. But before I could get angry, Baphomet entered the room and rapped her knuckles against my cage. Cattle prod clutched in the white knuckles of her other hand, reminding me of what would happen if I didn't comply. Still, I couldn't bring myself to eat it. It was human flesh, my brother's fucking hand. How the hell was I supposed to eat that? She pointed the rod towards the food, glaring at me. I didn't make a move. She shook her head in mock disappointment, but I saw the grin threatening to split across her face underneath the mask as she brought the prod towards me. As soon as it made contact with my skin, my body locked up, but my mind was still aware for a few seconds. I noticed tiny details, like cigarette burns on the underside of her wrists, and the faint smell of rotting roses. I could have sworn she apologized to me, but that probably didn't happen. At that moment, I decided I would let her torture me until I passed out. I would do anything other than eat my brother's hand. I don't remember much of what came right after that. Presumably, I blacked out for a while. When I came to, I was surrounded. Asmodeus stood right across from my cage, flanked by Baphomet and Baal. In front of them was an object on a rug. It was covered with a dark velvet blanket, so I couldn't tell what it was. "Well," Asmodeus began, "you haven't been quite the model prisoner, now have you? But you've been punished enough, and you did put up a good fight earlier. So I will give you 2 options. Either eat what you have been given, or we will give the rest to the others. After all, they are starving." With that, He removed the blanket to reveal my poor, mutilated brother. He looked awful, palish and trembling, the bones of his shoulders jutting out and his teeth pushing out the gaunt skin of his mouth. He looked like one of those Somali pirates, barely conscious. He stirred a little. I could make out the stump where his hand was cut off. It had been roughly tied with what looked like an old piece of red silk. Knowing this was a battle I had already lost, I hesitatingly brought the plate towards me. There was some sticky, congealed blood on it. The meat looked like beef, kind of, although less red. I told myself that I would have to pretend it was beef or veal I was eating and just power through it. I closed my eyes and brought it to my mouth, trying to swallow as much of it as I could in each bite. But, oh God, when you're starved for days on end, and then given what could be considered a goddamn feast, animalistic instincts take over. Soon I was tearing off chunks of meat with my mouth like a bear. Doug decided to become fully conscious at that moment. I will never forget how he looked at me, first with relief and love, happy to see me after so long. The expression quickly turned to pain as he must have felt the loss of his hand and looked toward the stump. Pain melted to horror, shock, betrayal as he realized what I held in my hand, what I had been eating. He began to scream, a bone-shattering, blood-curdling scream, which made me drop his hand in fright. He didn't stop, even after Baphomet poked him with her rod. Seemingly immune to the pain now, without pausing for breath, he kept yelling, while I unconsciously moved towards the back of the cage. Finally, he had to be taken out, as Baal and Baphomet lifted the rug off of the floor and marched out. Asmodeus unfolded his long, powerful frame and followed them out, a limp breaking the evenness of his gait. It gave me pause, but I couldn't figure out why. And even though the screams became distant, they lasted for hours, haunting me as I moved in and out of sleep in my cage. I awoke with a start on what I assume was the next morning, the nothingness of my sleep having been interrupted by the stink of shit and piss. My head was blessedly empty until I remembered the taste of blood on my tongue. Fuck. I didn't know if Doug would forgive me, but at least he might have lived. That was nice to think about, but I was sure Baphomet and Baal wouldn't leave me much time to sit with anything remotely pleasant and, wouldn't you fucking know it, I was right. A cat's skull, strangely large and with scraps of flesh and maggots filling in the blanks, swam into view. Baal was lying on his stomach, face to face with me in my cage, and searching my eyes with his empty ones. There was something about him, disgusting as he was, that felt intelligent, dignified. I could easily imagine him having been in my position before, hardening himself, losing who he was and receiving nothing but a gruesome mask and what was left of his life as a reward. I feel like he could read what I was thinking. A tiny bit of him seemed to loosen, and beneath the horrible mask, the remaining tendons, I could make out his mouth sliding open into a bloody, near-toothless smile. He didn't speak, I told you. He never spoke, but he nodded just a little and wriggled even closer until I could feel his breath. Close enough and rank enough that, God help me, I nearly vomited up poor Doug's hand. We sat there like that, captor and captive, for what felt like hours, until I heard Baphomet's laughter and a woman's screams of pain. Baal crawled to his feet and skulked off, hands shaking a little. I heaved a tiny sigh of relief, one that was interrupted by Asmodeus's return. Everything's bigger in Texas, I heard him saying as he rounded the corner, and there was a laugh in his voice that made me nauseous again. As he came into my line of sight, I reached down and picked up a rock, holding it in against my arm and praying it was concealed from his view. I sat there petrified, staring down the dimly lit hallway. Asmodeus paused, unmoving for a moment. The sour lights above flickered on and off, leaving a looming shadow of his tall figure on the floor. As I gazed at his ceramic mask, he grinned. I could tell by the way his eyes curled upwards, forming a taunting look. He crossed the long hallway in several steps, his limp now impossible for me not to notice. He reached his hand out to the cage door and gripped it, knuckles whitening. "Little brother number 2, he said. "Let's go for a walk." With a swift motion, he unlocked the cage door and gestured for me to step forward. My heartbeat picked up as I stepped out of the cage. Was this a shot at freedom? Asmodeus limped ahead of me, the lights continuing to flicker. My mind raced faster and faster as I planned my escape. As we came to the end of the hallway, it darkened quickly. Only one light remained in the hallway before we came to a turn. In a split-second decision, I hurled the rock into the overhead light. It shattered and went dark. A static darkness ripping through the lightscape. I acted quickly, aiming a sweeping kick into Asmodeus's knees, weakened already by his limp. His tall body tipped to the side like a grain silo wired with demolition charges. As he fell, his arms flailed, reaching for a target he couldn't find. His head slammed against the thick wooden wall, a corner of the mask chipping off, and didn't move. I scampered to my feet, quickly rounding the corner of the hall. My bare feet slapped the concrete floor loudly, reverberating in the narrow quarters. I quickly came to the end of the hall and ducked behind a door as I heard voices on the opposite side. I held my breath, silent and still while I listened. Asmodeus was already up apparently, sounding unperturbed and no worse for wear as he calmly issued an order. In the dark space where I lingered unseen, like a shadow concealed by the night, I felt safe. After God, or perhaps the devil, only knows how long I'd been kept in a cage, attended to like an animal awaiting slaughter. There was immense power in simply being hidden from view. They couldn't control me if they couldn't find me, and this was my chance to turn the tables on the bastards. A course of action, brutal and bloody, had begun to form in my mind when a dagger pressed against my throat and a hand clamped over my mouth, stifling a scream before it could escape. A hot, rancid breath tickled my ear, soon followed by an icy whisper. I like this cozy little nook in the dark too. Little brother number 2. The voice was as serpentine as it was feminine. Such a silly nickname for a specimen like you, so big and strong. It cooed. Who are you? I whispered back. Baphomet is all I am. Anyone else I might be is long lost. What are you going to do to me? The blade at my throat bit deeper into the thin skin covering my Adam's apple, drawing a rivulet of blood that trickled into the sweat and grime plastered to every inch of my skin. Anything I please, Baphomet replied and giggled softly, like a viper uttering a sibilant hiss. It would please me to give you a chance to determine a better fate for yourself, to assume a more pleasant position here in this lovely hell I've learned to call home. What position? The dagger drew second blood over my carotid artery as she shifted it and pressed harder. It occurred to me she might very well slit my throat for no other reason than she loved the cutting and bleeding of a body. Beside me, Baphomet whispered. I felt her lips, scabrous and moist, brush my earlobe. Inside me, a shiver swept through me like a chill wind. What do you expect me to do? To kill for me and with me? Asmodeus. No, you fucking fool, she whispered. He cannot be killed. He made me Baphomet. He made all of this. He is God here. I don't understand. You will learn with time, or die a fool, Baphomet said dismissively. Please, I am not here to please you. Fool, Baphomet spat. Not yet. And then she was done with whispers, wailing instead. I have him. I have the runaway. Soon dim fluorescent lights flickered to sickly life in the corridor, and Baphomet and I were no longer alone. Flanked by Baal in his pitiful tattered and rotted cat's head, stood Asmodeus towering before us, the small trickle of blood leaking from his forehead and drank greedily up by the broken edge of his mask, making him look all the more imposing. Well done, my dear Baphomet, huntress extraordinaire. It will be your honor to deliver the death blow to little brother number 2, but only after we've wrung all the suffering we can from him. No, beloved Asmodeus, Baphomet replied. He will not die by my hand or yours. Asmodeus's fists clenched, and his body tensed like a great beast readying to strike. Baal backed away from his side, trembling as he shambled. Do explain why you would deny my right and refuse your duty to discipline this impudent side of long pork, Asmodeus demanded, and do it quick. I want him as my new consort, Baphomet cried. Baal has grown weary of this life, and I fear he loves me no more. Let this prisoner fight for the place beside me, and if he wins, you can make him anew as you made me. And poor Baal, you want that pathetic slab of meat to be your new sidekick plaything? Asmodeus sneered at me with hateful eyes. His mouth turned up in a look of disgust I never thought possible in another person. Was he even human? There was something incalculably evil about this man, whatever he was. I could hear in his voice a hatred for his fellow man. For me, it unsettled me, made me feel wrong, like I should hurt myself to correct the obvious mistake I was in his eyes. He shot a hateful glance to Baphomet, just as vile as the one he made for me. Hate equally, he didn't discriminate. It seems. Why would this woman follow such an inhuman creature? Then he spoke once more, very clearly exasperated. Speak, state your case, then, and be done with it. I'll admit, I've grown tired of Baal. His attitude offends me. Baal looked more than a bit on edge at these words spoken so coldly. They didn't even acknowledge his presence. He knew his time here was nearing the end. Desperate fear stank from his sweating pores. He was visibly agitated and ready to pounce, to fight, to keep the last bit of dignity he had in him. I don't know. There's something different about him. I can't place it. Maybe he's just new and I just know I can't stand the sight of the cat-faced asshole anymore. Do I need more reason? Really? Do I? There was more fear than contempt in Baphomet's voice. It looked like she knew her place, as if her defiance only ever went so far where Asmodeus was concerned. I grew more terrified as the scene unfolded. After all I'd experienced, something was coming to a head here and now. I felt it like a boa constrictor tightening around my ribcage. The wrongness was all I knew, all I could think about. Asmodeus took a deep breath, putting a leash on his anger. His eyes flitted to each of us, boring into us for a long, near-infinite silence. Fine, he said, and then I knew who Asmodeus was, the improbably tall frame, muscles hidden but not entirely concealed beneath his dark robe. The limp, silence followed by his guttural fine. He had been the second officer that stopped when Doug and I got directions from the Aransas County deputy. Officer Handsome. Don't have a superstitious bent, nor am I particularly religious. Still, Asmodeus did seem to radiate some kind of evil, powerful aura. Baphomet's insistence that he couldn't be killed, that he was the architect of this hell on earth, fueled that feeling. But he was mortal, big, strong, probably dangerous enough to kill me in a fair fight. But mortal, after all. I had knocked him cold a few seconds earlier. The crusting, crimson mark from that brief fight no longer looked like a badge of a battle overcome. It was a beacon of hope. Little brother number 2, Baal. Baphomet has just volunteered you for the battles royale. Baal, should you prevail, you'll retain your title and position. Little brother number 2, in the event you come out on top, you will usurp Baal's power and principality. I want my brother, I said. Asmodeus tilted his head to the side. Are you in a position to bargain? I don't care. If I win, I want him back and unharmed. Asmodeus spread his hands, the dead, smiling face on his mask bobbing in a nod. Little brother number 1 will be unharmed and unarmed if you win. You have my word. He stepped closer to me and bent down, so close I could feel icy waves radiating from his ceramic mask. Do you think you die if you lose? Is that why you're so glib to join the tournament? I said nothing. That junkie you bested wasn't put down for days. We waste nothing in this paradise. Little brother number 2, as long as he could provide for us like a producing, ovipositing chicken. Asmodeus stood. Baphomet, take your new lover over to Beelzebub's lair so he's properly motivated. Baphomet led me through tarps, shipping containers, and pallets arranged like walkway railings. We arrived at a solid metal door I hadn't seen. The screams and moans I could hear every waking moment were clearly coming from whatever hellscape laid behind that rusted portal. I didn't want to know, but I said nothing. Baphomet opened the door. A rush of stench wafted out like a blast of frosty air from an open freezer door. It stank of rot and decay, punctuated by the sweet smell of roasting meat. I also heard a new sound, much quieter than the screams and pleas but more consistent. Was the wet, slopping sound of a dozen mouths chewing too much gum. Rounding a blind corner, I could see several cages just like the one I lived in most nights. The people inside these cages, however, were clutching their newly bloodied and incomplete extremities. Some sobbed, some cursed, some prayed for death. Still, I couldn't find the source of the slopping. And then, there they were, arms and legs strapped to medical chairs that may have been obstetric examination stations. Men and women were being force-fed by an obese man with no shirt who wore a decaying pig's head and wire frame wings covered in human flesh. I watched maggots squirm in the eye hole of Beelzebub's mask. The prisoners ate strips of meat, dripping with the victim's blood. Beelzebub heaved a prisoner along beside him, cut strips from the man's, the boy's body and shoved it into the still chewing mouth to an exasperated groan from the corpulent bodies. The prisoners' stomachs pooched out like a party who had gotten their fill at Golden Corral. Their faces were a modern impressionist painting constructed from mingling blood and grease. My eyes fell on Doug, across the room from me. His eyes were closed, but tears flowed heavily as he ate. Losers who don't die in the ring are taken here. They eat, or eaten, Baphomet said, then turned and walked out. I found my way back to my cage alone. I could have made a run for it, but I needed Doug. The next 2 days, I was fed but not let out of my chicken wire cage. I could hear fights raging in the pit, however, and screams from losers being taken to Beelzebub. And then, on the 3rd day, Baphomet led me to the cement pit in the large room of the warehouse. A man so fat he seemed stuffed leaned against the wall of the ring, along with 2 athletically built people. I recognized the large man as one of Beelzebub's creations. I also recognized one of the others as a YouTube boxing instructor. I need to watch out for her. As Modius's deep voice rang out, "Begin," I delivered a side kick to the head of the athletic man nearest me. His skull snapped back, making contact with the concrete wall. His eyes unfocused, and I knew he would soon lose his grip on consciousness. And then Baphomet's words came back to me. Losers who don't die in the ring go to Beelzebub. Before the man fell, I kicked again, harder. A dark puddle formed under his fallen body. He wouldn't wake up in Beelzebub's dungeon. He wouldn't wake up at all. The boxing instructor delivered several blows to the body of her corpulent attacker. He didn't try to hit her. His weapons were his teeth. They had been filed down to perfect ripping tools. His mind filed down so he nothing but Beelzebub's command. Eat. I grabbed the man's arm and twisted. In a normal sparring session, I would have stopped after a quarter rotation or less. In a street fight, maybe a half turn to dislocate the joint. I went for the full, joint-breaking turn and a half. The boxer, clutching her bleeding forearm where the fat man had landed a bite, delivered a savage kick to his groin. I placed his temple near the concrete wall, but had to turn my attention to the boxer as a fist came my way. My Wing Chun was no match against her powerful, but slow, boxing. As soon as I had knocked her out, I grasped her throat with all my strength while aiming several kicks into the fat man's temple. Yes, it was murder, but it was also mercy. We were in hell, but Beelzebub was going to take them somewhere worse. I cried uncontrollably that night and prayed to a god I hadn't believed in to forgive me. As Modius sat in front of my open cage when I awoke after finally trailing off at some point. "I know what she sees in you, little brother number 2, he said. "We all personify a demon, a deity with unique flair and specialization. Yours, I think, is wrath. After that cold display yesterday, what else could it be? And wrath," as Modius leaned forward, "is the realm of Satan himself. You're powerful, too. I hope you prevail tomorrow." I nodded. My father was one of us, too. Abaddon, the destroyer and sower of discord. He taught me about his hobbies with younger boys. "With my looks," he said, "I could bring him an unlimited number of willing children for us to share. I had no desire. I used my looks to distract and convince. to cause others to do terrible things because they wanted my flesh. My father was among those. I squirmed on the floor of his motor home, appealing to all tastes equally like a nubile Adonis. I told him I would let him touch me if we played a game. Russian roulette. He blew his mind out in a car. Didn't notice all the chambers were full because he couldn't take his eye off the one he wanted to fill. Do you know who Dean Corll was? Asmodeus asked. I shook my head. A great man, the most prolific serial killer of his day. He liked boys, too. My father was one of his first. Corll imparted to my father his tastes and his knowledge of our. He gestured to himself and me. Lineage. He was Samuel, the demon of death. We hunt here, near Corpus Christi, like true believers, feeding on the body of Christ to keep us sated. I'll teach you well, Satan. Then I'll turn over my leadership to your capable hands. Asmodeus stood, then added, remember, Baal is a clever one. I stood in the ring again, this time Baal among the other 3 fighters. His cat mask drooped on one side and it seemed fractured near the middle. Still he wore it. Baal winked at me, then almost imperceptibly lifted his left hand. I could see Baphomet's cattle prod in his palm. The fucker was going to cheat. Asmodeus called for the start of the match in Baal, and I ended up fighting opposite opponents. He kept the prod hidden, though he did make continual eye contact with me as he tapped his neck. I drove my opponent to a position against the wall with well-placed punches. A single, flying kick toppled them toward the wall. I could feel the crunch in the spine as my foot forced in a direction contrary to the stationary wall. His neck broken. I had saved this man from Beelzebub. Baal tapped his neck skin again and raised his chin. I considered going for the easy kill and ramming my fist into his windpipe hard enough to suffocate him. Then I touched my neck and felt the line of scabbing blood from Baphomet's knife. Baal's neck was ringed with cuts in various stages of healing and one long, deep scar, likely why he couldn't talk. He gestured with the hidden prod again. I understood. Finally, take it. I ran at him, watching him flinch. I landed some pulled punches and found the prod in his hand. As I backpedaled, thinking we might fight Baphomet and Asmodeus together, Baal pulled out a shard of glass and pressed it up behind his ear, directly into his brain. I held the prod behind my back, my front toward Asmodeus, and tried to catch my breath. I had to be ready. Asmodeus and Baphomet strode forward. Asmodeus nodded a single time in my direction. Baphomet stroked the crotch of her pants and licked her lips. Could I take them both? As I climbed from the pit with one arm, the other concealing the prod, Asmodeus knelt. My liege, Lord Satan. I swung the cattle prod at his prostrated head, my heart sinking when I heard the shattering of the ceramic mask and no cry of pain. I sidestepped toward Baphomet and swung again. She took the blow, silently letting the electricity burn through her nervous system. She collapsed, likely in both pleasure and pain. I had no choice but to attack Asmodeus again. As fast as I was, he was faster. He spun away from my cattle prod and landed a metacarpal-shattering blow to my hand. I dropped the weapon. I lashed out with kicks, throws, punches with my one remaining hand. Asmodeus parried them or allowed them to hit and laughed them off. His humongous form was a problem. He threw me to the ground and my vision exploded in white nothingness. My head sloshed like a lifeboat in a squall. Asmodeus's large, steel-toed boot shattered my ankle before I could scrabble out of the way. And then 3 blasts rang out. Fate or God or the universe rapping on my slowly closing door. Asmodeus clutched his shoulder and whipped around. 3 more blasts knocked him off his feet. Aransas County Sheriff's Department. Everyone on the ground. The voice was loud, but shaken. More from the rows of cages than killing a criminal. I assumed. A tan shirt stretched over a beer gut moved into my field of vision. Everybody Wing Chun? It asked. I nodded. Are you okay? I nodded again. It was the sheriff's deputy who had stopped Doug and I initially. In the next few days, the deputy explained he had tried to find our rebuilding project so he could take photos for his son. A parkour fan. He thought one of us might be the poster his son followed on YouTube. When he couldn't find any building projects, he searched Google for the information. thinking Doug and I had been lost. All he found was a post from the boxing instructor saying she was off to Rockport to help her fellow countrymen. The deputy's suspicions saved my life and countless others. In total, 25 people were freed and 5 bodies found. The 2 ring fighters, Baal, Asmodeus, and one of Beelzebub's experiments. Beelzebub was shot and killed when the deputy's backup arrived. His fingerprints matched those on file for a man born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1921, a Nazi war criminal nicknamed the Butcher by his concentration camp inmates. The man under the pig mask, however, was not nearly 100 years old. At most, he was 50. Baphomet was gone. No trace of her existed except for the footage the sheriff's office could pull from the cameras. She may as well have been a ghost. I was cleared for the 2 murders caught on camera under self-defense. I wanted to explain they were defense, but not for myself, but I didn't. More than anything, I wanted to collect Doug, get out of Texas, and never come back. Doug went through 3 long surgeries. Physically, he's healthy. Mentally, Doug was quiet for days. He didn't speak a single word. Back at home, I asked if he needed to talk about what those people did. They were not people. Jim, Doug shouted. They were demons in human shells. I could feel the energy flowing from them and corrupting me. I've sinned a lot, Doug said another day. He wasn't a religious guy, but something had changed in him. I wanted to tell him about what I had done. Instead, I tried to tell him he had a God-given right to be happy, any way he wanted. He wouldn't hear it. He left last week for some gay re-education camp in Alabama. After all we went through, all the pain and killing and suffering I pushed myself past just to get him back. Asmodeus still took my brother from me. Story number 2. I found bodies at an abandoned school in Texas. Hello, my name is Caleb. I spend a lot of time urban exploring abandoned places like malls, towns, and schools. It's just something about the aesthetic that makes all the happy chemicals in my brain fire off. I'm also a huge skeptic, so I like to find haunted areas to explore and test, and every single time there's nothing there. Just an eerie, empty building. It's not that I want to debunk them. In fact, it's the contrary to that. I want to be scared. I want things to happen. Things that I cannot describe rationally using physics and science to debunk. You see, I'm atheist, but I was raised Christian. I truly want to believe there is something more than when we die nothing happens. I believe last night was something I can actually believe in. I have evidence of something more than just human, something paranormal. Recently, I decided to explore a well-known hotspot in a small town in Texas. It was an abandoned school with a very dark history. To explain some of it, a large school shooting caused 19 children and the shooter to lose their life. The shooter reportedly took the blood of the victims and stored it in a bottle. Near the end, he locked himself in the room with the bodies. He drew a bunch of occult symbols on the walls with the blood, then drank the rest before taking his own life. Spooky stuff. To me, what's spooky about this is how the locals and local government were able to completely keep it covered up from national news. This is unless you dig deep enough. Even if you take a look after the events, the school stayed opened for only a little longer due to many of the children going missing while school was in session. Some say the screams of the missing children are still heard during witching hour. I never believed the stories, but it leaves a good ambience to film in. So a week ago, I packed my things and went from Missouri and drove all the way to Texas. As I entered the city, I was shaking heavily. It was as if my instincts were telling me to turn back. I felt uneasy and nauseous, so I decided to, instead of camping out in the school, I would take a hotel for a day or two and scope it out and ask the locals around what is with the school for a documentary. I got to the only motel in the town. It was small but cozy. Sign in the front said vacancy, so I went into the lobby and asked for a room. You can have room 23. I can show you the way. The motel clerk waved me over to follow him. Clerk, what brings you to this town? A bit out of the way from anything. Me, I wanted to do a documentary of the old elementary school. It's something I do around the country. Clerk, oh, that old thing? I've been here my whole life, and to be honest, it's scary stories, but it's just a big empty building with nothing going on, to be honest. If you want to head there, you can, but you might as well look elsewhere. What's your name again? Me? Oh, I'm Caleb. What's yours, sir? Icarus. I am Icarus. Nice to meet you, Caleb. He showed me the room and said, Icarus, if you need anything, call the front desk and let me know. Me? Okay, thank you, Icarus. I'll be hitting the hay, though it was a very long drive. Icarus waved and smiled, then walked away. I had an eerie feeling about Icarus, but then again, since I came to this town, I have been feeling ill and off. I think that gas station burrito has gotten to me. Never trust random gas station foods. I was able to put all of my stuff up and locked my car and room for the night. Laying on the bed, it felt too silent. For a small town, there was no traffic at night, and it was only 10 p.m. Odd for something to be this quiet. I decided to just flip on the TV to see if I can just zone out, but to my luck, it was just static. I just shut it off since there's no way I could possibly sleep with that on. So instead, I just plugged my laptop into an outlet and used my mobile hotspot to connect to turn flip on YouTube. Maybe then I can fall asleep to some lofi tunes. I felt it working as I slowly passed out. I woke up early morning in a cold sweat. My body had goosebumps all over it and my heart was racing. I have no clue why this happened. I kinda just said maybe it was a bad dream I didn't remember. Headed downstairs into the main lobby. The motel here gave away free coffee. This morning I saw a new clerk. Large man in stature, very chiseled jawline. A handsome man indeed. New clerk. You must be Caleb? My partner was talking about you. A newcomer to town. Me? Oh yeah? Hopefully good things. Who are you, might I ask? Tyler. Oh yes. How rude of me. I'm Tyler and Icarus is my husband. We run this motel together, but we don't get many visitors, just your casual out-of-state ghost hunter or thrill seeker due to that rotting school. Me. That's what I'm doing here. It seemed interesting to just check it out. Tyler. That's what Icarus told me. To be frank, there's nothing there. Back in the day, him and I used to hang out there a lot. It's old and dusty, so if you do go there, bring a ventilator. Me, I will, thank you. You both said it's empty, but I'm hoping to find something. Tyler. We just want you not to waste your time, laughs. Me. I have been wanting to check it out, so even if I go there, I will just be kicking rocks and debunking the haunt. I gotta go, but thanks for the coffee. Tyler. Just be safe, the place is old, so it could collapse any moment. Me. Thanks again, Tyler, I'll be back later tonight. I walked out of the motel and headed toward my car. As I unlocked the door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like something malevolent staring at my soul. I swiveled around as my anxiety was becoming so immense I couldn't breathe. I have never been prone to anxiety attacks. This is usually the opposite, as any of my friends and family know I am very calm and collected. But here I am, heart pounding, and I was sweating like a marathon runner. It was so bad, as soon as I got my car door open, I slammed it shut, locking the door. I had to turn the AC on to cool off. I felt safe. I don't know what that is, but it was strange. I thought to myself, must have been the coffee. I drove up to the school. The road and parking lot leading was littered in beer cans and graffiti. The average abandoned place. But it all seems to stop right before the school. No litter and no markings. It looked clean. This is new, I said aloud. I got out of the car and it was eerily quiet. Not even bugs nor birds were making any noise. The doors were off the hangus and the building wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Well, I guess they were exaggerating, but why? I got to the opening and decided to walk through the main hall. The layout of the school wasn't that special. It was 3 stories high. Each floor had the same design except the first, since it had a basement and a small boiler room. The other 2 floors above had your usual about 20 rooms each and 2 sets of bathrooms on each floor. The walls was an off-white hue and it smelled of rusty iron. I decided to walk around and looked into the bathroom. There was a large blood stain on the back wall. It must be years old, as it was just a stain in the wall. It was then I felt a chill up my spine as I heard what seemed to be whispering in the hallway. It was low and guttural. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I decided to hide in a stall as they passed by. As they got closer, I can hear what they were saying. Person 1. Do you think he already died? Person 2. No, Icky. Still daylight. The thing only comes out after 7 p.m. Icky. Do you think we can save him? I hope we can. I don't want what happened to. Now I can tell whose voices it was. It was Icarus and Tyler. What do they mean by the thing? At this point, I thought they were out to kill me, so I stayed silent listening to their voice. Tyler, Icky, don't worry. We will not let anything else be hurt by the thing. I've been working out and stocking up. It will not beat me this time. Icarus, I love you, Tyler, I can't lose you. You mean the world. Tyler, don't worry, I will protect you this time. I will be fine. Icarus, sighs, I trust you. Maybe Caleb is at the hotel now. It's getting dark, we will need get what we need, then come back and hope for the best. I heard them slowly walk away. They didn't seem like they will hurt me, but who knows nowadays. I stayed put for another 10 minutes or so. When I stopped hearing their footsteps, I stepped out. That was strange. Oh well, time to set up. Maybe I can catch them on camera causing the paranormal stuff. I pulled my micro cameras out and placed them on the ceiling throughout the school. I got to the basement and the door was bent forward like someone pushed it while it was locked and bent it halfway down. The other side of the door was just covered in blood. Further inside was a body. A child who looks like they've been there a long time. The skin was black and there was no smell. It must have been dried up. Just then I got dizzy and nauseous. I fell backwards but caught myself on the wall. I vomited because the next to the body of the one kid was hundreds of separate body parts and bones. All looked like they were gnawed on. How many people have lost their lives? I bet it was Tyler and Icarus. Those sick fucks was all I could think of. I decided to set up a trap. This was just a simple trip noose. It was designed to trip up anyone. So in the trip line, I set my backpack partial opened, revealing my travel money, hoping they would be greedy and take it. The time rolled by and my watch just hit at 7 p.m. An alarm was on my phone. It was telling me things were moving in the school. Not one but 10 different signals at the same time. The school was alive and I could hear children screaming and crying. I pulled my phone out as I see spirits runing back and forth the rooms. At exactly 7:35 p.m., the sun was set and it was pitch black outside. This was what I was looking for. Proof, undeniable proof of spirits. What else could be true? That didn't matter. I felt like I captured lighting in a bottle as I recorded all of it and was wireless sending it to my laptop in the motel. But at 6:30 p.m., the spirits all ran into one room. They looked terrified as I was scratching my head wondering what weird behavior these things were doing. Maybe they were on a constant loop when they die, going back to where they were killed. As I was closing my app to stop recording was when I saw it. A large creature with elongated limbs reaching the floor. It was white with a red hue as if its skin was translucent. It had no real facial features like a nose or ears. Its eyes were small and bright white and his teeth were black and pointy. Seconds later, it looked into one of my cameras and it smiled. In an instant, the thing went on a full-on sprint on all fours. I can hear its feet slapping on the floor as it rushed by the main entrance. It was then it roared. I know you are here, stranger. You smell like you're not from around here. You're fierce smellless. It took a long smell with its mouth. Delicate. I kept my mouth quiet and slowly pulled my pistol out, hoping to put it down. I was so terrified my legs couldn't stop shaking. Came around the bathroom door, so I jumped out and fired 4 shots into its legs and arms. You son of a bitch! I'm going to enjoy devouring you. Every inch of my body was screaming, run, get out. But I was frozen in fear as this thing slowly limped toward me. You're mine. It reached its arm out, almost grabbing me. I couldn't move, as if I was a statue. I was so afraid I was going to die, and I couldn't do anything about it. Right before this thing could touch me, I hear, Tyler, remember me, fucker? Huh, Jason, the thing, ha 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 ha, what? Are you back for round 2, you? Jason turned around to face Tyler, pulling his attention off me. Jason, oh ho ho, you've grown a lot. You better start running, little rabbit. Tyler ran down the hall and up the stairs, and in that instant Icarus runs in and grabs me. Icarus, come with me and don't slow down. Tyler will be okay. My body wouldn't move, so Icarus slapped me out of my trance. Icarus, come on, idiot, I told you not to come here. Let's go. Me, why? Yeah, okay, sorry, let's go. We started to run out. When we got to the main road, I can hear Icarus whimpering and crying. Icarus, "Come on, Tyler, I can't lose you again, get here safe." All of a sudden, I see Jason falling out of the window and crashing into the floor below. Jason, "Gwa, good one boy, you've gotten strong." Above, we saw Tyler bruised and cut in some places but standing strong. Jason stood up and saw us. "Jason, you fool, I got your little boy toy and guest here. You'll never make it down on time." Jason sprung at Icarus with lightning fast speed. My body moved on its own. I was screaming as I jumped in front of Icarus. I felt the creature's claw bore through my stomach and out my back. I was losing consciousness. The pain was so unreal. Its breath was hot and smelled of blood. In that moment, I felt my life pass before my eyes. I don't remember much, but as I was slowly regaining consciousness, I saw Tyler drive a large metal pole through its head. I dreamt some more and was coming to as Tyler and Icarus were in my car driving me away. St. Me. Al. There. Next thing I know, I'm in the ICU on a bed with both Tyler and Icarus by my side. They cheered as they saw me wake up. Me wa. What happened? Icarus. You saved my life, Caleb. We killed the son of a bitch. It's finally dead. Tyler. I hope you don't mind, but I deleted all the footage you saw. The world is best forgetting this ever existed, and those trapped kids can be at reset. Me. I. Coughs. I understand. I don't want to relive this night. Do you have my laptop? Tyler pulls it out of a bag and hands it to me. Tyler, yes, but I scrubbed all the... Icarus. Ahem, I scrubbed all the video files. You really need a different password, the password one. We all laughed silently. Me? Thanks, guys. How can I repay you? Tyler, no, you saved us. I almost died to the thing before, and now he's nothing but ashes. We can move on as well. Shortly after they left, I passed out. Hours later, I woke up and was in that hospital for a week. But this wasn't the last thing that happened. I decided to go back to the motel after it was all said and done and my wounds healed. But when I got there, it was dilapidated and boarded up. This was the right one. Across the street from an IHOP. I asked around the town and the people said, "Oh, that? It used to be a motel but was shut down 20-odd years ago." I kept getting the same story. Then who was Tyler and Icarus? When I asked that, they shook their heads. Those kids went missing 10 years ago. Some say the old school got them, but that's just an old tale. Now here I am telling you all this. Maybe you might run across Tyler and Icarus in that small Texas town. Wherever they are, I hope they know they put my ass into retirement. And you, thanks for reading, but please never go to an abandoned school in Texas. Story number 3. If you drive to Texas, don't do it at night. A week or so ago, I was driving down to Texas. It was a long drive, one that would take 2 days unless I drove nonstop throughout the night. However, I was eager to reach my destination, and I chose to tough it out for the sake of getting there sooner. The drive started out relatively normal. I drove for a couple of hours south and I felt good. I had my music cranked and a cooler full of energy drinks in the passenger seat. When I saw the sign saying, "Now entering Tennessee," I thought I was making record time. I must have forgotten to watch the clock though, because the sun began to set. I was partially confused, mainly due to the fact that I had left earlier in the day. But I disregarded it as the idle distractions I'd created for myself to pass the time faster being the cause. Something else odd I noticed was the open freeway. Normally, I would expect to see many vehicles all traveling to different places, but instead, I seemed to be the only one out and about. Still, I wasn't feeling tired, and I had already committed to driving straight through the night, even if things seemed strange. But as I drove on, I realized that the sun had set far too quickly, and with the lack of vehicles on the road, it looked like I was driving in a void. The blackened world around me was only illuminated by my high beams, but I could only see perhaps 15 feet ahead of me. There were a few normalities like guardrails and mile markers, but if something were to appear in front of me, I'd likely hit it because of my lack of visibility. So I pulled over. My vehicle came to a subtle halt on the side of the freeway, and I turned on my emergency lights. Realistically, I knew it wasn't a fog. It was just dark, darker than the world behind my eyelids. I suppose I wanted to see another car pass by before I concluded that something had gone wrong. But none came. I waited for more than 20 minutes and not one car or truck barreled down the freeway. I decided to roll my window down and allow some fresh air into my car. Plus, I was slightly panicking because I did have somewhere to be and this was taking up precious time. Suddenly, the engine shut off. Even the accessory power had gone cold. I performed some percussive maintenance by smacking my hand against the dash as if it would magically fix everything, but it obviously didn't. Then, I heard a quiet ticking sound. You know the sound your fingers make when you tap them against a table? It was like that, but instead of the soft, fleshy contact you'd get from the skin of your digits, it was more like the clicking of nails against plastic. My intuition told me it was coming from under the hood and therefore I'd have to step outside. But just as I was about to open the door, I almost had a heart attack because hanging over the trim of the windowsill was a hand. I freaked out and flung myself into the passenger seat on top of my cooler. The hand was tapping its pale white fingers against the inner part of my door, and after my initial fear died down, I thought that it may have been someone looking to help me. Foolish, I know, but I did have my 4 ways on. A part of me knew full well that another vehicle hadn't pulled up behind mine while I was distracted by the engine malfunction. But I still inquired, "Hello, who's there?" The fingers stopped moving and the hand slipped down slowly over the side of the door out of sight. I waited while trying to catch my breath before asking again, "Hey, who's there? Why are you messing with me?" No sound. Not even crickets responded to me. I turned my head to peer out of the rear window and couldn't see anything, which made me wonder more as to who was outside of my car. My ear was pressed against the passenger window, and just as I was about to slide back into the driver's seat, I heard the tapping a second time right next to my ear. I nearly got whiplash from the speed at which I turned my head to look out of the window. There wasn't anything there in terms of a tapping hand, however. There were fingerprints left in the condensation on the outside of the glass. My heart raced and I crawled back into the driver's seat and tried to stupidly roll the window up, even though I quickly realized that was futile. Then, I started to hear footsteps in the gravel on the side of the asphalt, but when I looked in my mirrors, I saw nothing. That was until my headlights came on without warning. They flashed brightly ahead of me and illuminated the figure of a human standing directly in the light. But I couldn't see who it was because they were missing their head. The headless torso held out its thumb as if it were hitchhiking. However, it only did so for a moment before beginning to approach my vehicle. I tried to start the engine, but for some reason my key wouldn't crank, and then I thought, if the headlights are on, then surely I should be able to at least roll the window up. It moved slowly, the body that is, towards me with a shambling, unstable gait. Unfortunately for me, my window wouldn't go up. Even when fiddling with the key in the ignition, I started to panic and sweat began forming on the palms of my hands. By the time it was at the front corner of the driver's side, I decided I would get out and confront it. As I reached for the door handle and pulled, I found that it wouldn't open. I have one of those stupid pull-up locks that sink into the door, so I wasn't able to grip it and force it up. The electronic unlock didn't work either, so my only option was to climb out of the window. The problem was, it had already reached my side mirror. There was no way I would be able to crawl through the window without that thing grabbing me. So once again, I slid into the passenger seat with my feet poised to kick if it tried to worm its unnatural way inside. From there, I could see it was a masculine body that was exceedingly tall, and it wore a gray sweatshirt laden with holes. It had scuffed pants with tread marks denoting a tire had crossed over them at ludicrous speed. If I had to guess, I'd say they had been run over. As it tried to reach its arm inside, I kicked it away. It didn't appear to have much more than primal instinct because it stumbled back and took some time to regain itself. Still, regardless of the fact that it was a brainless walking corpse, I was still terrified. When it reached inside the second time, I scooted myself towards the driver's seat and forcibly jammed my foot against its chest, sending it falling to the ground. I used the opportunity to get out of the car via the open window and run around to the trunk. I couldn't open it without the key, which I had stupidly left inside. But at least I could get away. But as it rose to its feet, I felt an immense pressure in my head as if someone were squeezing my brain. My vision became blurry and different parts of my body burned with a fiery intensity. Every time I tried to move one of my limbs, I couldn't, and the paralysis weaving its way throughout my body made me an easy target. The headless torso continued shuffling its disjointed feet in my direction with an outstretched hand, but the other was held low with its thumb out. Suddenly, my faculties snapped back into my control, and I was able to avoid its mindless descent by stepping to the other side of my vehicle. I don't know what made me think the car would start if I tried again, but despite my former failures, I awkwardly jumped inside and turned the key. My eyes widened with joy when the engine turned over, followed by the familiar rumbling of the vehicle running. I threw the shifter into drive and slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation and sped off into the dark. I thought I was in the clear, and my breathing slowly returned to normal. It was odd that some strange part of me thought that maybe it was just a ghost that was asking for help. But that was highly improbable, and now I know that wasn't the case. The freeway was still obscured by the all-encompassing darkness, but I didn't care. I just kept driving. Then my heart skipped a beat because standing on the side of the road was the headless person. I drove by but couldn't see them in my rearview mirror due to the darkness. I took a breath and drove on without trying to think about it too much, while taking a look at my clock to see what time it was. It read midnight. Great, I said aloud, still maintaining a relatively high speed. My hands were firmly gripping the steering wheel, and I kept thinking it was over. But I was wrong again. Like before, I saw the body standing adjacent to the freeway with an outstretched thumb. It started walking into the road as if it were trying to be hit. I avoided it and continued on, completely freaked out. I took a peek in my rearview mirror, and I could have sworn it was sitting in my back seat, but as I quickly glanced over my shoulder, it was just an empty seat. My paranoia was somewhat satiated when I saw it again, but now it was holding something in the hand that didn't have its thumb out. As I drove by, I narrowed my eyes to see it closer. It was holding a smiling head. At this point, I was close to fainting from the fear. I just wanted this horror loop to end, but as that thought crossed my mind, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof of my car. I jumped in my seat, startled by the sound, and looked up. Obviously, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear movement and I could sense the weight lurking above. Regrettably, during all the chaos, I had still forgotten to roll the window up, which I admit was entirely my fault, much to my dismay. I say that because the sound suddenly stopped and I thought it was over once again. But when I looked to my left, I was met face to face with the severed head. The body was on the roof, holding the head in my open window. I yelled, and it tossed the head inside, and it latched onto my thigh, biting deeply into my muscle. It laughed maniacally, and I nearly crashed, trying to deal with both the head and keeping my vehicle on the road. I yelled out in pain and began pounding my fist against the back of the head. Luckily, one of my attacks dislodged it from my leg, and I grabbed onto it with my free hand before throwing it out of the window. All at once, the darkness lifted, and I was able to see the head bouncing down the freeway in my mirror, followed by the body it belonged to sliding off my roof, only to tumble on the road. I was breathing so hard I thought I might lose consciousness, and my leg was bleeding pretty badly, but I dared not stop. I started to see other vehicles, and that's when I finally allowed myself to feel any sort of relief. The events I had experienced shocked my system, and I decided I would pull off at the nearest town and get a motel for the rest of the night. When I found one, the lady at the counter said, "Your face is so pale. Are you okay?" I looked deeply into her eyes and said, "There was a man, or rather, a body on the freeway, without a head. It terrorized me and nearly killed me." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Oh, you young people. You always have the craziest stories. Although I do seem to remember someone else saying something about a body on the freeway once." My eyes lit up. What did they say? What happened to them? Well, nothing happened. We called the police, but they found no bodies, nor did they find any evidence of an accident. The person ended up leaving the next morning, and that was that. "Ha!" I uttered softly. I got a room for the night and addressed my wound. It wasn't as bad as I originally thought. It must have been the lighting that made it look worse. I stayed until around early morning and then checked out with barely any sleep. Now I'm telling you to avoid driving down any freeway if you're going to Texas. I mean, I can't say for sure what the catalyst is, but something to do with MY specific trip caused me to experience this horrific anomaly, and I just want to warn everyone I can. Although the lady at the counter did say someone else experienced something similar, I just don't know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. What's even worse is that when I was about to get into my car to continue my drive south, I noticed a fresh handprint pressed firmly against the outside of my driver's window. I guess I'll be sticking to day driving from now on. Story number 4. I'm going back to Enchanted Rock State Park. Near the center of Texas, a perfect pink crystal globe rises into the sky. The granite that forms the small mountain has stood for eons, drawing first the native tribes that inhabited the dry, dusty plains, then later, much later, the Europeans that claimed the world for themselves. The tribes had their myths about the enchanted rock. As the mountain came to be known, tales of the deep rock speaking, of demons rising from a cave hidden at the precipice of the mountain gave way to tales of the ghosts of men and women murdered by the indigenous savages, and priests losing themselves in the eldritch depths of a cavern. In our more modern time, the Enchanted Rock is a simple tourist destination. Men and women bring their children to climb the Enchanted Rock, to take photos of the sunrise and sunset. Tales of the supernatural gave way to screaming tourists. Ghosts and curses faded away, replaced by selfies and the pursuit of fleeting fitness. In truth, the cave at the top of the Enchanted Rock is more than myth. It doesn't show up on any map the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department gives out, and the rangers won't speak of it. It is there, though. The rumors spread from group to group, and a few intrepid souls always seek it out. Most come back with simple tales of dark, narrow caves that lead down into the darkness, to the heart of the mountain. Some just never come back. Yeah, right, you think. Of course there's a cave on top of an enchanted rock. Of course there is. And how, exactly? Do you know? I know, dear reader, because I heard the rumors. I asked the questions that lead me to the cave. I took my family to the Enchanted Rock, and I found the cave. I discovered the enchantment, the curse, down in the Enchanted Rock. We weren't spelunkers. My family and I, we loved to hike, to explore the wilds. We loved finding the out-of-the-way gems, the hidden jewels of the natural world. We loved each other. My wife and I prepared as well as we could. We took snacks and drinks, supplements to help prevent dehydration. We took headlamps, flashlights, for each of us, and our 3 sons. We prepared for an adventure. We weren't prepared for what we found. We drove through the night from our Houston home. Anyone with young children knows why. By the time we made it to the state park, the sun was coming up. The beauty of the sun hitting that pink mountain, of the desert rocks glittering like rose-colored gems, cannot be overstated. The sun seems to set the world on fire. The sparse desert vegetation doesn't distract from the sun's fiery light the way greener, healthier growth does. We were the first in line at the park's gate. Enchanted Rock is too hot, too dry, too isolated to ever really be busy. Maybe people can subconsciously sense that it's too wrong. The ranger was friendly in the way only people from rural southern areas are. She gave us a map, gave us the park news. The water level was low, so the bathrooms were closed. While I looked over the simple printed map she had given me, as I'd been warned, the cave wasn't marked, not on the large-scale map of the park on the front, and not on the close-up of the Enchanted Rock itself on the back. To the average visitor, the cave simply didn't exist. When I looked up with a smile and asked the ranger if she knew anything about a cave at the park, she froze. Her body went still, and it was almost as if a shutter slid down over her eyes. Her smile turned frigid, seeming to draw close to shattering. She rushed to assure me that there wasn't a cave in the park, a few small overhangs, but most definitely not a cave. When I pressed her and told her I'd been told of one, her entire demeanor changed. She went from southern hospitality to beleaguered bureaucrat in the blink of an eye. With a curt repetition of the fact that there wasn't a cave, she turned away and left the empty gateway to print more maps. with my 3 boys waking up. I didn't press her. I'd been warned that they wouldn't talk about the cave anyways. We parked and my wife and I gathered our stuff while our oldest, Adian, took the younger 2 to the porta potties. Ashen came back thrilled at all the possibilities of disaster that peeing in a hole in the ground presented his demonic toddler mentality, while Tesla came back in tears, the potty having eaten his bottle of soda. Once the kids had had their snacks, we grabbed our packs and set off. We followed the directions I dredged from the depths of the internet and headed up the summit trail. The trail led straight up at a steep angle, and the short, twisted juniper trees were punctuated by needle-covered cacti and mesquite with thorns like small daggers. The whole park smelled of dust, ancient, musty, dead. The Enchanted Rock was one of those places so far away from civilization that the silence almost felt oppressive. The children clambered from boulder to boulder like goats, kids in every sense of the word. Ashen climbed each one with the bravery only 4-year-olds can still feel, while the other 2 risked less of life and more of limb. Hiking with children is never a linear journey, but we slowly cut back and forth, climbing our way up to the base of the Enchanted Rock. We stopped to take a break at the base. We stared up at the steep, pink monolith as we ate and drank. From a distance, the rock almost looks short, flat, but close. It was intimidatingly steep. The few people we could see at the peak looked like insects. Finally, we started our ascent up the actual mountain. The climb was steep, strenuous, especially for the boys and their short legs. Since we had come early in the year, it was brisk, bordering on cold. We made good progress, though I had to carry Ashen off and on in some spots. The mountain was just too steep for his tiny body. We finally made the summit around 10 in the morning. The climb may have been hard, but the view made it all worth it. It felt like you could see into eternity in every direction. The sun warmed us while we sat down for another break, enjoying the view, enjoying each other. We ate our breakfast at the summit, none of us knowing it would be our last meal together. The sun glowed in the boys' blonde hair as the wind blew it around their faces, and all was well with the world. While my wife ate with the boys, I checked our instructions. From the summit, we were meant to head straight over the top and down the other side a bit. The cave was supposed to be in the center of a cluster of rocks, though the descriptions were vague at best. I talked to a few of the other climbers while the boys played. In between the everyday conversation, I asked each of them about the cave. The first few had never even heard of it, but I finally found an older hiker that had. Like the ranger before him, the old man seemed disturbed by the mere mention of the cave. He finally admitted to knowing where it was, and reluctantly agreed to guide us to the rock cluster that hid it. As we all walked over the summit, the old man told us what he knew about the cave. He said it was old, older than anyone really knew. People didn't go down in it much, especially not with kids. He had never made the descent, nor would he. According to him, the rock cluster was full of rattlesnakes, the cave of rats and filth. When we made it over the top of the rock, we could see several rock clusters below us. The old man led us to the left, to a steep vertical drop-off. He pointed out the cluster and wished us well before heading away at a much faster pace than he'd set while with us. We stared down at the miniature valley in the rock, excited for the adventure, eager to face the challenge. As we watched, a hawk swooped up at us from the small valley, the bird straining to reach the elevation we had climbed to. Unlike most of the small rock clusters, no families played near our destination. No climbers moved up the steep walls. We descended carefully into the tiny valley. A tumble down the steep incline would have meant the end of the adventure. The boys Saturday scooting down the pink granite on their behinds. We didn't waste any time and headed straight to the rock cluster. Once we made it to the cluster, we had to circle around it, back and forth. The entryway to the protracted center of the cluster was hidden from sight. The strangely blocky house and car-sized pink boulders leaning against each other in a chaotic jumble. We finally found the entry by searching for the salmon, a large rock formation that looked, with a little imagination, like a massive, pink fish. The entry to the maze that led to the cave was right below its mouth. We went ahead and sat at the entry and put our gear on. We all put on our reflective vests, a light plastic helmet, and a small headlamp. We finished putting on our knee pads, and then we stopped to take a family photo, using our timers on our phones. It was another last for us. From there, we headed down into the rock cluster. Contrary to what the old man had said, we didn't see any snakes as we climbed over rocks and under boulders, always heading down into the rock. Our only company was the water that constantly ran down towards the cave. The climb down into the entry never got completely dark. The pink granite reflected the light chaotically from both ends, providing enough light to avoid using the headlamps. The dimness of the tunnels made the sunlight at the end of the tunnel blinding as we came out into the tiny clearing at the center of the rock cluster. As we all stepped into the clearing, even the boys fell silent. It was beautiful, maybe 100 feet in diameter, and filled with the glittering pink stone that comprised the rock itself. Boulders lay about haphazardly, almost as if something had burrowed up, splitting the flesh of the enchanted rock itself as it was born. We had to clamber about the clearing, looking under the rocks for the hidden entrance to the cave. We looked for maybe 10 minutes before Ashen finally found it, a fact he was immeasurably proud of. As I said earlier, we were used to hiking, rock climbing, being on our own. We were all in good shape, and more so, we all knew what to do, how to act. The kids knew to stay in order and didn't have to be reminded. For what it's worth, we had at least raised good children. The boys played on the boulders while their mother watched them as I inspected the entry into the cave. I'd been warned that the opening was steep and narrow, but that was a total understatement. I had serious reservations about sliding down into the earth without being able to see anything. But I headed down anyway. The entry itself was narrow and dropped down about 8 feet at a steep angle. Someone had drug a thick dead branch down into the cave and jammed it across the passage. The granite was slick from the water trickling down into the abyss, and I couldn't see past the end of the branch. Using the branch to brace my weight, I slid down into the cave. Once I made it to the end, I found the true entrance. 2 boulders were wedged at the end, with a narrow opening barely wide enough for my shoulders to fit through. I tried to see down into the depths, but the reflected light coming down the tunnel completely ruined my dark vision. Finally, I laid on my stomach and slowly wormed my way through the whole legs first, feeling about for a foothold. Just as I was about to give up and try to find another way, my foot finally touched stone. Once I had my foot firmly on the floor, I slowly let the rest of my body slide through and dropped to the ground. The entryway above was just within my reach, but if I hadn't known where it was, I could have never found it. I tried to let my eyes adjust, but anyone that has been in a real cave knows that that level of blackness can't be pierced by human sight. I ran my hand along the wall and stumbled, the rocks and debris under my feet crunching and grinding unpleasantly. Giving up, I flipped my headlight on and got my first real glimpse of the enchanted rock cave. The floors, the wall, the ceilings, the entire cave was formed of massive boulders pressing against each other. The floor itself was subtly angled, leading down into the mountain. The rocks I'd stepped on during my descent were actually something much more macabre. The floor was covered in the minuscule bones of tiny animals. From the best I could tell, the poor things had fallen in over time and gotten trapped. I finally turned away and headed back up. It wasn't easy, but I managed to pull myself back up to the entry using the tree for leverage. From there, it was easy enough to climb on up to the clearing to get my family. My wife was a bit nervous when I told her how tight the entryway was, but the boys were so excited she couldn't help but give in. We headed back down, with me in the lead, then Ashen, then Tesla, then Adian, with their mother coming last. Once I was down, I helped each one down into the cave. The boys were excited, their 3 cherubic voices disappearing into the depths and returning with 1,000 echoes. Ashen immediately started gathering bones. Evidently, he needed them. While the boys explored the first chamber with their mother, I headed on down into the tunnel to the next room. I was able to get down the tunnel on my hands and knees without much effort. Luckily, the next room was large enough for me to stand up in. The floor still sloped downwards, but instead of there only being one path forwards, there were three. Above or beside each tunnel, helpful strangers had spray-painted signs on the wall. From what I'd read, an X was used to indicate a tunnel system that ended shortly ahead, while a heart was used to mark the main path. The room had 2 X's and a single heart painted on the wall, so it seemed like the forums were right. From there, I crawled back and got Ashen. I took him through to the new chamber and had him sit on the floor, then headed back for Tesla. Finally, Adian and his mother came, and they all explored the new chamber. We traveled in that way down into the depths, from room to room, tunnel to tunnel. There were a few parts that were extra tight, requiring us to crawl on our bellies or go around tight, narrow corners with rock pressing into both front and back. But we were all enjoying the challenge. We moved forward, ever downward, not sparing a look for the climb back up. Finally, we made it to the room we'd chosen for our break. It was larger than the rest we'd come through, and was called the Valentine Room because it had hearts sprayed all over the wall. We offered the boys a snack, but they were fine, so we let them play instead. After about 20 minutes, we had the boys come sit with us and hold our hands, and then we shut all of our lights off. The hearts painted on the walls, activated by our lamps, immediately started glowing. We sat in the gentle glow, watching as it slowly dimmed and finally died. You haven't truly known darkness until you've been underground. The dark down in that cave seemed to animate, alive, as if it had consumed the light rather than replacing it. Sounds cliche, but we literally couldn't see our hands in front of us. We could hear the ever-present water trickling down into the depths. We could smell the musty, wet odor of the cave, feel the cold, smooth granite, the cool, dank air, even taste the dust and grit of the rock itself. But we could see nothing. Finally, we turned the lights back on. Though welcome, the lights were blinding, making it as impossible to see as the darkness had. Ashen tried to tell us to turn them back off. He said the people down in the cave didn't like them. We all rolled our eyes and continued on. We moved on, ever downwards. We'd been down in the depths for a couple hours when we came to a room with a single exit. The kids waited with their mother while I explored ahead. The tunnel slid down sharply, before dropping off again. It was reminiscent of the main entry to the cave, but it didn't have a convenient tree to slow my descent. Regardless, I let myself slide down the tunnel, and even managed the drop with a certain amount of grace. The tunnel I'd fallen out of was disguised from the bottom, the pink granite camouflaging itself. After ensuring that I could climb back out through the invisible tunnel, I explored the chamber. There were a handful of tunnels leading downward into the rock. 2 had hearts painted in them, the rest X's. We decided to take the leftmost tunnel, and ended up in another room with multiple open tunnels. Descending ever further into the tunnels, we explored room after room, always following the pathways the hearts indicated. Virtually all of the chambers at this point had multiple exits. Adian found a bit of graffiti in the room, something that was sadly common throughout the cave. This was only notable for its supposed age. The writing itself said, 1837, 19 days. Adian and Tesla laughed at the misspelling. After another hour of climbing down into the cave, I started to worry a bit. The cave was supposed to exit at the base of the rock, spitting us out onto another pathway we could take back to our car. We hadn't seen daylight in hours though, and the anxiety started to build. My wife and I discussed the situation quietly, while the kids played, throwing rocks down into the empty tunnels. Ashen trying to spook everyone with his stories of the people in the caves. We decided we'd go ahead and climb back up. Once the decision was made, we went ahead and headed back up the tunnel we had just come down. When we made it back to the chamber, our true trouble began. After climbing through so many tunnels, they all started to blur together. We couldn't tell which tunnel we had used. The paint was meant to indicate which way to go down, not up, swallowing our panic. We let the kids play. I worked my way up each tunnel, trying to look for anything that would indicate we'd been there. Finally, I had to admit, at least to myself, that I couldn't tell. Hiding my own worry, I acted like I had found the path. I lead my relieved wife, my trusting children, down the tunnels, praying we'd find the right one. Just as we had come down one person at a time, we worked our way back up one at a time, going from room to room. We finally came to a room where none of the tunnels were marked, where we obviously hadn't been. At that point, my wife's composure finally cracked. She demanded to know if I knew where I was going, or if I was lost. I tried to reassure her, but frankly, I was just as frightened as she was. The children started to pick up on our emotions and started crying. Finally, my wife and I calmed everyone down. We offered the boys a snack again, but they refused to eat. None of us were hungry or thirsty. It was like the rock slowed time down, made you not need anything. We started working our way back, all of us searching the rooms, the tunnels. We went back to trying to head downwards, trying to find the fabled exit. I don't know how long we searched, but eventually, exhausted, we had to stop. We held the children as they napped and tried not to talk about the terror waiting for us if we couldn't find the exit. I woke to what I can only call whispers. The voices, if that's what they were almost inaudible. They'd drift in and out, always just barely unintelligible. The boys finally woke up, frightened beyond what I can explain. We were lost, deep underground in a place the locals refused to admit even existed. The voices in the dark turned fear to panic. The children wailed in the darkness, while my wife and I silently cried with them. We all finally fell asleep down in the rock. Once we woke up, we started heading down again, choosing our unmarked paths at random now. Always down, always. By mid-afternoon on the second day, we lost our headlamps, their batteries dying. The children were frightened, but we still had our flashlights. We let Ashen carry a single light, trying to conserve it as best we could. As strange as it sounds, we still had no need to eat, to drink. All we could think about was escaping the rock, seeing the sunlight. We had decided to rest again when we found a large room that had the walls painted again. Unlike the spray paint we had seen above, the designs in this room were done in charcoal and clay. They were obviously Native American. A lot of the art was abstract, but the central design seemed to be of the enchanted rock. It showed the rock looming above the flat plain. The rock itself was bisected by a steep pit that led down through the mountain, into the plain itself. Underneath the plain, an immense fanged mouth was opened under the pit. Even in a normal time, I think the painting would have seemed ominous, unsettling, but finding it while buried in the earth, that was terrifying. Truly, that night, my wife and I avoided discussing the what-ifs again, the terror all too real. Again, I woke up to the whispers. Ashen was clinging to me, shining his light around the room. We didn't see anything, but the voices stayed with us until we fell back to sleep. Over the next few days, we clambered down through room after dusty room. We occasionally saw signs of life, but all of it was old, if not ancient. We went through light after light, our supplies dwindling. We'd prepared for an adventure, not a nightmare. In all that time, none of us felt hunger, nor thirst. I know it sounds mad, but we felt neither the need to sustain ourselves, nor the need to relieve ourselves. The boys snacked a few times, more out of habit, but that eventually stopped too. We traveled, we slept, we traveled some more. The children, resilient as always, cried often, but also managed to play and make games. The tunnels grew smaller, yet grew in number. Our possible routes seemed infinite, but the rooms we went to grew smaller and smaller. On the day we pulled out our last flashlight, we also found the last of the cave drawings, the last that we could see. Anyways, there may have been more, invisible to our eyes. The last one we saw was divided into panels. The first depiction showed a star falling from the sky into the flat plain, leaving a massive crater. The next showed a hill above where the impact had been, with an ominous black oval where the crater had been. The next showed the hill blown to mammoth proportions, yet a pit led down into the plain. As it had earlier, the enchanted rock had been born. The black oval had been replaced with an eyeless serpent, its long body seeming to climb up the pit. The last panel showed the rock, grown yet again, stick figures with spears through stick figures without into the pit. The serpent resided at the bottom of the hole, seemingly content to be fed. We stared at the wall in silence, the children still, unmoving. I'm not ashamed to admit I held my wife as we wept. The terror was too real, too present. We slept in that tiny, cramped chamber. The whispers didn't wake me that night. Instead, they invaded my dreams. The nightmares I had that night have never faded nor changed, like a normal dream does. In all honesty, I believe it was less a dream and more a communication. I saw the ancient mural enacted, the figures dim and poorly illustrated, yet moving, alive. In the dream, the star was a ship, the serpent an alien thing. I watched as the alien crept into the minds of the ancient natives, demanding its tribute of blood lest it rise. I watched the natives make their sacrifices, before finally they built a massive granite temple above the cave, trapping the serpent. I saw the thing fall tumescent, saw it creep into torpor as it starved. Then I saw the conquerors arrive, the conquistadors, with their arrogance, for their hatred and fear of anything different. I watched as they destroyed the temple and murdered the native shaman. I watched as they destroyed all records of the existence of what they considered a pagan shrine. That night, the whispers spoke to me. They told me the secret of escape, of how to get out, but I fought them. I resisted. I would never feed the thing. The next morning, when we awoke, the last flashlight wouldn't turn on. We had rationed as best we could, but our light was gone. The sense of panic that came with the realization that we'd never see light again was mind-consuming. I think we all went a bit mad then. We screamed for help. We howled prayers. We cried. And then we fell silent, exhausted. We sat in the tiny, cramped room with the panels for what felt like days. The whispers came to me at night, only to me. Now, we slowly came to terms with the situation. We were never hungry, never thirsty. The children started to move about a bit, started to play again. As we adjusted, the darkness, impossibly, seemed to brighten as time went on. I don't know why we didn't hunger, didn't thirst. I don't know why we could see, but we could. It wasn't vision as normal people have, but we could seemingly peer into the shadows ahead a few feet, our world outlined in shades of gray. Color was gone, details as well, but we could see. We could move again. We traveled in that twilight world for what felt like weeks, months, years. There was no way to tell or track time, not when we were constantly moving. The voices, the whispers, came to me every night. By day, we traveled through the umbral darkness. By night, I fought illustrated demons while the whispers voiced their support. For the demons or for me, I knew not. Finally, the day, the night, came from my wife. She no longer wanted to continue on. She wanted me to end it. For her, for the boys, to give them peace, rather than the unending trek through the abyss. I convinced her to give it more time. We weren't physically suffering. The boys had adjusted. Sometimes they even smiled or laughed. She agreed, and I sobbed as I held her, held them all, knowing what I had to do. That night, when the whispers came, I didn't resist. I didn't fight them. I gave in, steeling my mind against the self-inflicted pain to come. I watched from above as my animated form threw 4 figures down the pit to the beast. One was almost the same size as me, but 3 were pitifully small. I woke before the others, instantly aware. I waited patiently, staring down at their perfect faces. Even in the twilight that had become our lives, they were my everything. This is where the alternate ending would cut in. It would replace everything after this. My eternal baby, Ashen, was the first to rise. He smiled at me, filthy, grungy, but beautiful beyond anything else. The rest rose shortly after, and we continued on traveling down, ever down, following the water into the abyss. We finally came to another steep drop-off. Like the ones that preceded it, I slid down, and then, without checking or caring if I could climb out, I helped the rest down. I knew what lay ahead, but I played through the motions regardless. Each lie a searing wound in my soul. The room had two other exits. One narrow, claustrophobic tunnel headed down, but another high up in the southern wall seemed to lead up. My wife was immediately excited, as were the children. I tried to lift my wife into the tunnel leading up, but she simply didn't have the upper body strength to pull herself up. Likewise, the children were simply too short even when I lifted them. We tried every way we could, until finally my wife gave up. Finally, we stopped in the chamber to rest. While the children slept, I convinced my wife that we needed to separate. She was in a fugue, mentally exhausted, emotionally drained, or I'm positive she'd have never agreed. Maybe the thing, hungry as it was, helped dull her mind. She was to head down with the children, while I would haul myself up. She was to mark every tunnel she took with a pile of rocks, so I could follow her if I had to turn back. Or better, made it out. While my children slept, I kissed them one more time and hugged them tight. I think she knew I was betraying her in the end, but I don't truly know. My last sight of her was of her face, covered in silent tears, staring up at me as I shimmied up the tunnel to my damnation. The tunnel itself was the tightest we had encountered yet, and went up, steeply. I had to lay on my belly with my hands above my head to even fit. I used my hands to slowly drag myself up, my feet to push. The granite of the rock pressed into my sides, my belly, my back, rubbing my skin raw even through my clothes. For the first time, I realized that if the tunnel ended, I would almost certainly be stuck forever. With that realization, the claustrophobia, the panic, the horror of our situation finally hit me. I screamed into the stone that was only inches in front of my face. My body was wedged so tightly the sound echoed forward. I like to think my children, my wife, didn't hear me screaming in despair. I crawled through the tunnel rapidly, frantically, pushing myself inch by inch. I was blind more from terror than sight, but after what seemed an eternity, I felt the tunnel slowly widen. Eventually, I was able to crawl on my hands and knees. At that point, I turned back and called down to my family that I'd made it, and was continuing on. They shouted back, sending their love, their hope. The last thing I heard from them was Ashen. His angelic voice echoed up the tunnel, telling me he loved me 1,000,000, forever, biting back the racking sobs that tried to take over my body. I crawled forward and upward. I left my family to their fate and rushed to my own. I have no idea how long I climbed upward, through unending tunnels and rooms, like the descent into the hellish depths. It seemed unending, like it lasted for its own special kind of eternity. I went a bit mad at some point. I spoke to myself, to the whispers that now rang with condemnation. Sometimes I spoke to my wife, or my children, lost to the depths. When I came to my senses, I was in a room with spray paint on the walls. From there, quickly, easily found my way back up. Suddenly, the markings were clear. I knew which paths to take to escape. Eventually, I came to rooms I recognized. Having been in them so long before that it felt like another life. When I finally made it back to the original chamber, with the entry tunnel above my head, I simply fell to my knees. I screamed and cried. I railed against the hungry thing down in the depths. In the end, though, all I could do was climb. So, that is what I did. I climbed out of the abyss, into sunlight so bright that it seemed like it burned not only my eyes, but my soul. I could only wish that it would burn off the filth that had been ground into my spirit down in those tunnels. When I finally climbed out of the rock cluster that disguises the cave, I sprinted to the first hiker I saw, terrifying them with the intensity of my obsession, with my obvious delirium and disgustingly filthy body. When they answered my one single question, I felt my sanity break. I who had crawled through what felt like multiple eternities, had been in the cave for less than 3 hours. When it finally really broke through, I snapped. I alternated between hysteria and catatonia for days, weeks, months. There was a massive search for my wife. My children, the best spelunkers in the world, came, and they found nothing. The cave was empty. They explored every chamber, every tunnel, and came out the southern exit without even finding any proof that I'd been there. With my mind shattered and the very real risk that I had murdered my family, I was hospitalized by the state of Texas. I spent over a year in their system before my mind healed enough to allow me to be released into controlled supervision. It took another year of counseling, of nightmare after nightmare before I was released on my own. I saw my family every night, surrounded by whispers, constantly burrowing down, down, down into the enchanted rock. It's been almost 3 years since I crawled out of those hungry tunnels. 3 years of mental torture, of emotional agony. 3 years of preparing for what has to be done. The thing thinks it won. It thinks I sacrificed my family. But the whispers of those ancient shamans showed me the way. I have my ticket to tour the enchanted rock in just a few days. I'm going back. You see, my family is there. My wife, my sons, they're down there with the thing, and I have to go back. I was given close to $1 million in life insurance payments. In the year since I was released from the state's custody, I've been putting it to good use, gathering supplies, lights and rechargeable batteries, hand crank charging stations, ropes, hooks, the works. I've also managed to acquire close to 200 pounds of an insanely powerful plastic explosive. Learning to use it was simple. The internet is full of hateful radicals of one denomination or another willing to spread mayhem. Down in the tunnels, I'll have nothing but time to carry down whatever I need, whatever I'm willing to carry, step by step, down into the depths, time to set charges on tunnel after tunnel, until I've rigged the cave to be completely closed with a single blast. The thing thinks it won, but I'm coming for it. It'll give me my family, or I'll destroy the cave, and all of us can die down in those tunnels. At least we'll be together again, and the thing will spend eternity starving. If you are reading this, I'm probably dead. Regardless, whatever you do, don't look for the cave. Story number 5. My last words. Please never go to an abandoned school in Texas. I don't have much time, so I'll try to crunch as much info as I can. This lock can only hold this thing back for so long. Icarus is a rather suiting name, knowing what I got myself into. Let's start with where it's at. The school is located in Texas, not saying which town, just please avoid any abandoned schools in Texas, for I don't know if this thing is for each school. Please understand, I don't want anyone to go out like I am about to. So this all started as a joke at first. An old school my friends wanted to check out and do like a ghost hunting video. We never thought we'd go since most of us were still scared of loud sounds. It wasn't until Tyler, the oldest in the group, said he recently bought a few laptops, a bunch of cameras, and a few spirit boxes. It was just a fancy recorder. Anyhow, he seemed like he wanted to. So we go together as a group. It was Tyler, John, Rick, Leisha, and I. We all sat down and read all the ghost stories online. It only involved being cold or the occasional scratch or two. Plus, Tyler said, if we get some of these things on camera, we will go viral and be rich in no time. I was the only techie guy there, so I was to handle tech and set up the YouTube channel where we would post all of this content. Tyler was the strongest one, so he carried all the stuff. I just set it up. John, Rick, and Leisha all were to bring food, water, and first aid kits just in case. I know John was in JROTC, so he had legitimate first aid training. Let me describe the layout of the school. It was 3 stories high. Each floor had the same design except the first, since it had a basement and a small boiler room. The other 2 floors above had your usual about 20 rooms each and 2 sets of bathrooms on each floor. We had enough cameras to log each hallway and bathroom, but as the rumor has it, the basement and boiler room are where all the action kicks off. One more important note is why the school is haunted, is because about 40 years back there was a massive school shooting here. 19 children lost their lives, including the shooter. Now, this was before big media could handle the issue, and the local government paid the families outrageous sums of money to keep Texas's top school from getting blacklisted. They said it wasn't much longer when kids ended up going missing in the area. Some kids would go to the water fountain and just disappear when no one was looking. This too was covered by the school board as they went missing after school hours. The school board held a vote the next year to close the school down. Maybe they couldn't bear the thought or guilt of more children being lost. Shortly after, the school became a local legend and how the souls of the children are trapped, etc. All local legends get exaggerated, where one person trips on a rock and suddenly there's a ghost who pushes people down. However, this one seems legit. It is a hidden gem in the ghost hunting community, as it's very secluded and hidden from the public, so really only locals know of it. There are reports of scratching, pushing, possession, and even what most people call hellhound, as it's a large black dog with bright red eyes. We arrived at the school ready to go. We have enough food and water to last us a few days, just in case someone wanted food. We also brought all the tech and tripods for the camera. Rick's dad had a generator that was in his shed. It was old and dusty but ran just fine, which was perfect to keep all of the equipment juiced up. I brought my mobile hotspot so we can go live on YouTube or just post on the account once it's all done. Plus, we have to keep in touch without our parents. We decided to set up a base camp in the first floor's bathroom. It looked still put together besides some broken glass, but that was easy to sweep away. Once we got set up, Tyler, Rick, and I went to each floor to set up the cameras while there was still some light out. We ran the wire and I turned them on record once we got back to the hub. And then we waited, which took a few hours since we got there at 4 p.m. and sundown wasn't till 6 p.m. Time passed by slowly with nothing showing up on the cameras yet. So we all started telling ghost stories to pass the time. Most of them were silly and made zero sense. Why would anyone lock themselves in a room they can't get out of? Isn't it ironic? Well, it wasn't until 7:35 p.m. when we had our first sign. Guys, we have movement on the second floor, Leisha said excitingly. We all rushed by the second floor laptop, where we saw just a shadow going in and out of the doors of the bathroom. It was moving fast as if it was running. I gotta go live on YouTube. We're going to be famous, I said. I quickly tabbed over and refreshed the page, to only get our live access denied. It's okay though, since our channel was new, we can just upload it later, Tyler said. Looking back, he was so optimistic all the time. I set all the cameras to record and to signal us any movement detected. As soon as I did, all the cameras dinged at the same time, letting me know something was moving on them all. So we all chose a camera to look at. The second and third floor was firing off with tons of activity. Shadow people, orbs, random debris being tossed, and doors closing and opening. It was very off-putting how it all started popping off. I got an eerie feeling. Like, have you ever had a sense of approaching or overwhelming dread? I started to sweat and panic. Everyone was so happy. We're going to be famous, Rick yelled out. Leisha and John were jumping in joy, yelling stuff like, "Fuck yeah, make some noise. It's gold." I looked at Tyler. He was white as a ghost. He must feel it too. I decided to pull him to the side, and he saw my face and how I was worried. Now, this was out of character for Tyler to be scared. I've known him all my life. He's always been my protector. I was the weak nerd and he was the big, tough but lovable jock. Hell, I even came out as bi and was bullied in school. Tyler was a senior and I a junior, and Tyler didn't seem disgusted. He always was by my side. So when I know something is wrong with him, I know. Tyler, yo big guy, snaps out of it, we need to talk. I shook him. In doing so, he looked down, blinked a few times, and with a straight face, he said, "We need to leave. Now." He rushed to the laptops and grabbed them, and the other part of the group was shocked. "Hey, what the fuck, man? We're going to be famous," said John. Tyler stared them down with anger. "You fucking idiots, I'm trying to save us. We need to leave now. Fuck the cameras, we can come back later in the daytime." Everyone gulped and saw he was serious. Tyler and I started jogging out. I had one laptop and he had the other. We were about to make it when we heard Leisha scream, I opened my backpack and threw my laptop in it and ran back in there without a second thought. I can hear Tyler yelling at me, "Stop, they are already dead, you idiot." I don't know what got over me, but it felt as if my body was moving on its own. As if my will to save my friends outweighed my fear of death. I got to the bathroom. In front was John. At least it was just his face. It was peeled off like orange and tossed aside. I can taste the blood in the air, and I can hear Rick crying in the bathroom. "No, no, 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 no. Please, we're sorry. Please, I don't want to die." I can hear in the background the sound of Leisha gurgling. I don't know why I didn't just run. I had to see for myself. It felt like a dream. No, it was a nightmare. I slowly and as quietly as I can go into the bathroom and saw John. His body was flayed like a fish. Guts were missing and his chest cavity was empty. I pissed my pants and almost vomited at the sight of it. I can feel my vision blacking out. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and before I can scream, Tyler covered my mouth. We used sign language to communicate what was going on. Never knew just learning this on a whim would ever come in handy. "We need to get out and grab Rick while the thing is busy with Leisha," Tyler signed to me. "I know, but how will we do it?" In the background, we heard a loud crunch and Rick can be heard vomiting. It sounded like a watermelon popping. It bit her head off. I can hear the squelching of blood coming out of her neck. "Icarus, we need to stay focused. I can distract the thing. It's not very fast," as I saw it running on the first floor cams. I shook my head. "What did it look like?" I asked. "It doesn't matter now, but it's not a wolf. Go hide in the girls' bathroom. I will lure it out and I'll meet you outside." I shook my head. "Be safe, bro." I signed back. We got into position. We can hear the thing still gorging on Leisha's body. I see Tyler as he gave me a thumbs up and a smile. This was the fakest smile I had seen him do. He then waved me to hide. "Hey, you ugly bitch. I know your punk ass is in there. Why don't you come for me?" The sounds of crunching bone and tearing flesh stopped. "Ha ha 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 ha." It started laughing. "You sound delicious, ha ha ha." The sound shook me to my core. I can hear it walking out of the bathroom. It must have stepped on John's body, as popping and cracking can be heard, followed by plopping of its feet. "You better start running, boy," it yelled. "Catch me if you can, loser." Tyler starts booking it as fast as he could. I only caught a small glimpse of it, but it was a pale man. He was naked but with no real body features. He had very long arms that scraped the floor and were covered in a red hue despite being nearly white. I could smell him as he ran by. His flesh was rancid and the smell lingered in the air. As he chased my friend, I can hear him laughing. "Ha ha ha, this is fun, run rabbit run." Once I couldn't hear him anymore, I ran to the other bathroom and saw Rick crying in a stall. I grabbed his hands, but he was covered in blood. I said, "Rick, are you okay? We're going to get out of here, buddy, it'll be okay." Rick said, "Icarus." He removed his hands from his fast and his eyes and nose were gone. Ripped out. "Icarus, I've seen the face of God. He came here to punish us for looking into the veil. I'm doomed, you must leave." I snapped out of my trance and grabbed him by his arm and quietly said, "No, we are leaving, not just me. I will not lose another friend." I hoisted Rick up and we slowly started to walk to the exit. "Where were you going, little rabbits?" I slowly turned to see. This thing caught up to Tyler. He was dragging him by his hands. He looked cut up but not eaten, however, he was unresponsive. I don't know what came over me, but I yelled at the beast, "Fuck you. Haven't you taken enough? Those kids 40 years back? All of those kids after who went missing? Is it not enough?" Rick pulled away and fell into the fetal position. "No, it's never enough. I will always be hungry. Always, ha 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 ha." This thing let out a bellow of laughter. It looked straight at me and looked at Rick. "And you brought me a snack." I love when they are afraid. It makes them much more satisfying. It was when he let go of Tyler and reached toward Rick that I saw Tyler launch up and drive a large metal pipe into its neck. Tyler grabbed my hand and ran. We ran into the basement. I can hear the thing crying in the background. "You son of a bitch!" We got into the basement and locked the door. Tyler was losing a ton of blood. He's been eviscerated. I can see him carefully holding his stomach together. I started to cry and yelled, Tyler, no, 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 no. This can't be happening. He looked at me and with his other hand. He placed it on my shoulder. He then coughs and says weakly, Icky. Listen carefully. There's nowhere to go. I want to say this. He starts to pass out. I shook him carefully. What did you want? I said. He just looks me in the eye and says, Icky, you are my best friend. I never told you, but I love you. I do. I'm madly in love with you. I couldn't help but cry as I grabbed his face with one hand and he smiled. I'm in love with you too. We shared a smile. I leaned in and I had my first kiss. It was shortly after he passed away in my arms. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in this fucking basement with this laptop and my Wi-Fi pod. I hope this gets through. I'm happy I got to tell Tyler my final feelings. I can hear this thing breaking into the door. It won't hold any longer and I have no chance. Tyler, I hope we meet somewhere in the ether. Whoever gets this, please stay out of any old schools. I love you, Tyler. See you soon. Story number 6. Stories from East Texas, shadows in the rain. The low, rolling rumble of thunder swept across the open plains like an ocean wave and passed over the layover bunkhouse with a growing crescendo that rattled the rafters and windows with its passage. I paused a moment and glanced out through the open doorway leading to the covered front porch and the dim light of the waning day beyond. After another few beats, I resumed pouring a cup of coffee and replaced the decanter to the hot plate before wandering out to join Jonas. The old cowboy was resting his elbows on the timber railing that fronted the aging porch, the tin cup and a neglected cigarette dangling from his hands. His eyes were focused out across the landscape, though the last bits of late afternoon daylight were rapidly fleeing in the face of the coming thunderheads. I had the feeling he wasn't really looking at anything in particular and was probably just relaxing and letting his thoughts wander after a long day surveying the far side of the old McCullen land. I could already feel the drop in temperature, and the air felt heavy and pregnant with the promise of coming rain. He spared a sideways look at me as I joined him, and I didn't miss the half-grin he offered. He took a drag from his smoke and gestured out to the shadowed landscape. I'll tell you, David, even after all these years, there's just something special about being out here all alone. Makes a man feel new, if you take my meaning. I thought I did and nodded as I sipped at the steaming mug. The coffee was strong and bitter, but I didn't mind so much. In the distance, lightning strobed and danced in the heavy cloud line that was rapidly marching our way. The wind was starting to pick up a bit, blowing in chaotic gusts that couldn't seem to figure out which direction they should be headed, tugging at us from all different directions. Bad night to be out there, Jonas said, flicking his spent smoke off into the dim light in a brief flare of sparks. I ducked my head and took a seat in one of the old wooden chairs we dragged out to the porch earlier. I'm glad we're going to be under a roof tonight, that's for sure. No offense, but I wasn't looking forward to sharing that tiny excuse for a tent with you. Old man, I said with a chuckle. Jonas cracked a grin and took the other chair, both of us sinking back and relaxing after a long day in the Jeep. Yeah, well, I can't say as I blame ya, I guess. I'm just glad the rain held off long enough for us to make it to this old place, he said, stamping his boot on the weather-worn wood of the porch. It's been a bit since I've been out to this section. Almost forgot this bunkhouse was even here. We'd been out riding the perimeter of the McCullen land in the Jeep since before sunrise that morning, surveying the damage caused by the violent storms that had swept through over the last week. Several tornadoes had touched down all over East Texas, causing all sorts of trouble, and Mr. Kirkman's land hadn't been spared. Earlier that day, we'd passed a quarter-mile section of fence line that was just gone, replaced with an angry brown track of destruction nearly as wide that scarred across the land, marking the passage of a pretty fair twister. Jonas had guided the Jeep carefully over the upturned earth while I took pictures and made notes of the location and damage. Crews would be out in the coming weeks to begin repairs, but that was for later. As the day wore on, the bright blue skies had begun to show evidence of turning nasty, but we'd been told that the worst of the weather had passed, so it wasn't likely we were in for more than just the normal summer gutter washers. Sure, there'd be plenty of thunder, lightning, and wind, but we didn't expect it to escalate much beyond that. Or at least that was our hope. As evening began to approach, Jonas had turned the Jeep away from the fence and towards a small structure I spied in the distance. He told me it was left over from the McCullen days and should serve us pretty well as a shelter overnight. First, my stomach sank when he mentioned it, but he caught the look in my eyes and quickly followed it up with reassurances that there was nothing ominous or ugly about the place. It was just an old ranch hand bunkhouse that had been used over the years as a layover for men working out in this area. I wasn't completely at ease, my thoughts drifting back to that damned abandoned homestead. But I knew it was going to be a hell of a sight more comfortable than the two of us trying to sleep in the Jeep or share the small tent that was stuffed in the back seat. When we reached the rough timber building, I was relieved to see that it wasn't much more than just a single-room structure with a few chairs and cots scattered around the interior, which was surprisingly well kept. I supposed it was likely due to the fact that the place was still used by some of Mr. Kirkman's crews from time to time. So, we parked the Jeep out front and brought our supplies inside for the night. Jonas and I sat there for a while in silence, just watching the approaching thunderheads and listening to the wind as it raced across the open fields of tall grass. It was cool and damp and smelled of rain. Overall, a nice change from the heat we'd experienced earlier in the day. Jonas had drained his cup and refilled it from the bottle, offering me a splash of whiskey for my coffee, which I accepted gratefully, trading him for another cigarette. As he was reclaiming his chair with a quiet grunt, he said, "Never did like the storms out here, though." It was pretty innocuous statement, but something in the way he said it made me think he had more to say, and I turned my attention over to him with a raised eyebrow. He stroked his steel-gray mustache for a moment, his cool eyes wandering over the vista before returning to meet mine. "The Caddo Indians have legends about the storms around here," he started, then paused and chuckled a bit. "Hell, I guess they have legends for just about everything, now that I think about it. But the storms were something they seemed especially wary of. I used to work with a man, full-blood Caddo, Levi White Ash. He was raised among the Caddo tribes and grew up listening to all the stories from his people. He used to like to spook the greenhorns whenever he had the chance by breaking out some bit of dark legend while everyone was around the fire. He was a fair, imposing man if you didn't know him close. A big bear of a man that stood a head taller than most everyone else and hard as a rock." Jonas smiled at the memory, his eyes going distant for a moment. He had this gold tooth right up front, where he'd gotten one knocked out during a tussle at a bar once. Gave him a bit of a menacing look, I'll admit, but once you got to know him, you realized he was just about the gentlest and most easy-handed man you're like to run across. His eyes met mine again before roaming back out across the plain. Hell, on the weekends he used to go volunteer at some homeless shelter up near Gilmer. Christmas, he'd dress up as old Saint Nick and pass out gifts to the kids of the other ranch hands. He never married or had kids of his own, so he made up for it by trying to take care of everyone else like they were his. Jonas paused a moment, then bobbed his head, almost to himself. He was a good man, a good friend. A smile crept across his face, barely hidden by the bushy mustache. Of course, he did have a mischievous streak about him and took every opportunity to play up the whole mysterious red man routine. Tickled him, I guess. Wasn't anything mean-spirited about it, and everyone always ended up laughing in the end. Hell, I'd be willing to bet that half the stories he told were made up on the spot, just as he was spitting them out. Some of them were real. Real? I asked, cocking an eyebrow and lighting a cigarette. You mean real stories from his people? I mean real, Jonas said, locking eyes with me. You know what I'm saying, David. You've seen with your own eyes things out here that shouldn't be. Things that have climbed right off the pages of some two-bit horror novel. I've said it before, but there are things round these parts that don't belong in the light of day. Things that you're not like to run across in other places. After a bit of silence, I closed my mouth and nodded, the memories of the McCullen homestead still raw in my mind. A peal of thunder shook the air and lightning lit the sky above us. I jumped a bit, despite myself, and looked back out across the fields. I could hear the distant soft hiss of rain on the tall grass and thought it wouldn't be much longer before it was upon us. Jonas sat back in his chair and continued. On nights like this, when the storm swept in and covered everything in darkness and noise, he used to talk about the shadows that came in the night, the others, the ones who answered the call of the storm. It didn't happen with every storm, of course, but sometimes, when you were far away from the lights of civilization and safety, you would hear a call, long and low and otherworldly, just below the hiss of the rain and the howling of the wind, like a horn from hell. He shrugged and shook his head, taking a sip from his cup. Hell, for all I know, that's exactly what it was. I ran with Levi for a while, just like you and me now. Sometimes, when he got into his drink, he'd tell me stories that he didn't share with the greenhorns. All those tales that he told them around the campfires were just to entertain, maybe put a bit of a scare in them. But those tales were safe, just a bit of fiction to pass the time. Jonas gestured out into the dim light with his tin cup. Somewhere out there is a watering hole, out past the fence line and up into the hills a bit. I've seen it myself once, and I can tell you it set me on edge just looking at that black, still water, surrounded all around by stones, like some sort of barrier constructed by long-forgotten hands. Levi told me that his people would sooner die of thirst than to so much as approach those waters. He said it had no bottom, just fell off into that murky darkness forever. He flashed a wry smile at me. But that ain't likely possible, I suppose. Just deep. I nodded, briefly turning my attention to a particularly brilliant flash of lightning that left its glowing afterimage on the inside of my eyelids when I blinked. The thick, bruised clouds were growing closer with each passing minute at a surprising pace. I was sure we'd be under them before long. Levi told me that, during storms like this one, when that call rolled across the dark plains, the shadows would drag themselves from that watery pit and roam across the lands of man. Jonas took a sip of his Irish coffee and fixed me with one of those looks. Woe be the soul caught out in the open when they came. I stayed quiet, letting the old man talk. My eyes drifted back to the wide-open grassy lands that stretched out in front of us for what seemed like forever. I watched as the foothills in the distance grew shadowed and vague, and then completely consumed by the thunderheads. It felt like the land was being eaten up as they approached, like maybe if a man were to take a mind of it and drive out there, beyond the leading edge of the storm, maybe he'd find nothing but infinite blackness where the hills once stood. Jonas fell quiet, his eyes gaining that faraway look he got when he found himself wandering through old memories. I lit another smoke and sat for a moment in silence, feeling the heavy, damp air blow across the covered porch of the bunkhouse, bringing with it the earthy smells of upturned ground. The temperature was starting to drop a bit with the coming of the storm, but I didn't mind so much. I don't think I ever met Levi, I said after a minute, taking a drag from my cigarette and following it with a sip of the now cooling coffee. He shook his head, dragged back from his reverie. No, you wouldn't have. Levi's been gone a long while now. Jonas didn't offer anything more about his friend, and I didn't press. Have you ever heard it? I asked instead. The call? Maybe. Hell, I don't really know. To tell you the truth, you hear a lot of strange things out here when you're alone and the storms blow in. I can't rightly say that any of them were the call. Exactly. He looked at me over his cup. Then again, I sure as hell never went to investigate them, either. I've seen enough to know that a man shouldn't go sticking his nose where it don't belong, especially out here. I ducked my head in agreement, taking a last drag off my cigarette before flicking the butt out into the rapidly dwindling twilight. I could see the rain now, drifting in beneath the churning storm clouds like a hazy curtain. The air was filled with the smell of it and felt charged with the lighting that flashed and boomed from within that bruised mass. I was about to stand and refill my coffee when Jonas started talking again, his gaze disconnected, distant. It was a night like this one, he said, pouring another splash of whiskey into his tin cup. A lot like this one, as a matter of fact. It was just the three of us, me and Tommy and Levi. sitting right here on this porch and watching a storm roll in over us. Back then, we didn't use jeeps to get around the ranch. They were too expensive. And Mr. Kirkman figured if we already had horses, there was no reason to buy a bunch of fancy jeeps that he'd need to spend even more money on to maintain. He gestured with his cup, a motion that took in the vast area of open land in front of us. The three of us had been out riding the fences for a couple of days already when the weather took a turn that afternoon. Tommy remembered that this bunkhouse was out here. I'd forgotten about it completely. And so we rode at a pretty good pace from that fence line directly for here, hoping to beat the storm. Nobody wants to get caught out in one of these summer storms. Hell, even if you don't mind being soaked to the bone, it ain't a good idea to be the tallest thing in the area when the lightning starts looking for a way to ground. Jonas cocked an eyebrow and turned a sideways look on me. I saw a bull get struck by lightning once. Damnedest thing. Storm rolled in and the rest of the herd moved into some trees for shelter. But this ornery thing just stood there in the middle of the pasture, like it was daring nature to mess with it. It wasn't but a couple minutes before this bolt of lightning came down and lit the whole area in this blinding white light. Hit the bull right between the horns and burned through its body and down its legs. It went rigid all of a sudden, like all its muscles locked up at once. I remember it took a single step after that. Just one step, and then it just went still and didn't move again. He smirked, somewhere between amusement and wonder. Son of a bitch was deader than shit, but still standing there, like it refused to give up. It was burned hollow from the top of its skull down to its hooves, but it never fell over. Never seen anything like it. Jonas took another drink and shook his head, pulling himself back from his wanderings. He adjusted the age-worn cowboy hat on his head a bit and continued. Anyway, we didn't exactly make it here ahead of the rain, but the worst of it hadn't caught us out in the open, either. We tied the horses in the shed out back and worked on getting ourselves into a dry change of clothes. Then we came out and settled with a warm drink to watch the rain. We were sitting right here. As a matter of fact, Tommy was over on my left and Levi was sitting right where you are now. I shifted a little in the old wooden chair at that, feeling a little uncomfortable, like I was somehow trespassing on a dead man's spot or something. I knew it was silly, but that awareness didn't change anything. Just then, the heavy cloud front finally reached us, stripping away the last of the dying daylight and casting us into deep shadow. The staccato sounds of fat raindrops began striking the tin roof of the bunkhouse, ringing dull and hollow. Then, a blinding flash of lightning lit the area in a ghostly pale light, and an incredibly ear-splitting and violent crack of thunder shattered the air at the same instant, so loud and sharp that I felt the concussion in my bones, felt it shake the boards beneath my feet. I jumped a fair bit at that, spitting out a curse with my heart pounding in my chest. But Jonas hadn't so much as flinched, turning his eyes back to the grassy expanse before us. We were just sitting here, shooting the shit and working our way through a bottle when Levi stopped talking all of a sudden. Mid-sentence, his brow knotted up and he tilted his head a little, turning his attention out into the rain. He'd heard something, though what it was I didn't know. Neither me or Tommy had heard anything out of the ordinary. "Did you hear that?" he'd asked us, coming to his feet and standing at the edge of the porch. First, I thought he was messing with us, trying to throw a scare into us like he often did with the greenhorns. But if you'd seen his eyes and the way the blood drained from his face, it was clear that he was dead serious. Jonas drained the rest of his cup, which had long since gone from Irish coffee to just straight whiskey, and set it on the floorboards beside his chair. "What did he hear?" I asked, my heartbeat slowly returning to normal. Jonas shook his head. He said it sounded like someone calling out to us from somewhere out in the storm. I told him that he was hearing things, that there wasn't anyone around us for miles in any direction. Nobody'd be fool enough to wander around in the dark when a storm like that was upon us. But he wouldn't let it go. He swore that there was someone out there, just beyond where we could see, moving around the bunkhouse. Me and Tommy both listened as hard as we could, but the only thing either of us could hear was the hissing of the rain across the fields and the whistling of the wind. Tommy made some joke about how Levi couldn't handle his firewater, and we tried to laugh it off. But you could see that Levi was really rattled. Jonas looked back at me, his eyes cast in dark shadows. I ain't gonna lie, David. Seeing this big ol' hoss, one of the toughest sons of bitches I've ever known, shook up like that, well, it was more than enough to steal away any other jokes we might have had. I finished my own mug and set it atop the porch railing, lighting another smoke with my Zippo. What happened? The old cowboy shrugged and leaned back a bit in his chair. Levi eventually settled down, but we all felt this weight hanging over us and decided to just call it a night. None of us felt like drinking or laughing anymore, and I think we were just hoping to forget about it until the light of day. It was probably close to 2 in the morning when the sound of something moving quietly inside the bunkhouse woke me up. I snapped awake and had my gun halfway out of my holster before I recognized it was just Levi in the dim light from the lantern, pulling on his boots. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" I'd asked him. He looked at me with the most haunted eyes I'd ever seen in my life. "It's back," was all he said. Before I could say a word, Levi rose up and pulled the door open, stepping out into the night. It was still coming down pretty hard at that point, and the wind blew in through the open doorway, bringing the rain with it. I jumped up and ducked after him, giving Tommy a kick on the way out to rouse him. By the time I stepped out onto the porch, Levi had already stalked off into the rain, hell-bent for leather. I saw his silhouette for a moment, the unmistakable shape of his big OL Magnum held in one hand, and then he was gone, disappeared into the night. Jonas went to dig another smoke from his pack but found it empty. I absently held my pack out to him, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. I went as far as the edge of the porch, shouting out to him as loud as I could, but I didn't see so much as a hint of him out there. I thought I heard a few words that sounded like he might have been calling out to someone, but I can't be sure about that. When I heard the scream and the gunshots, I yanked my pistol from the holster and took a step towards the edge of the porch, ready to run off into the storm after my friend. I would have, too, if not for the fact that Tommy had come up behind me and grabbed my arm, holding me in place. I tried to shrug him off, intent on charging out after Levi, but Tommy had an iron grip when he was a younger man. He about yanked me off my feet when I tried to rush out again. I couldn't understand why he was holding me back, and I cursed at him to let me go. Instead, he just snatched me back again, harder this time. "No, Jonas," he hissed, his voice as urgent and commanding as I'd ever known it to be. "Look," he told me, pointing an unsteady finger out into the stormy night. Jonas lit the cigarette that he'd been holding, and I could see a bit of a shake to the ember as he drew a deep breath before exhaling the gray-blue smoke. He picked up the bottle of whiskey and took a swig from it, not bothering with the cup. I don't think I'd ever seen him this agitated before, and his unease was infectious. It was full dark now, and the storm hadn't lost any of its intensity with the failing of the light. My mind was trying to play tricks on me. Shadows flitted in and out existence at the edges of visibility, and the white noise of the rain sweeping across the tall grass created ghostly voices in my ears. I touched lightly at the pistol at my hip, as if to reassure myself that it was still there. I felt foolish as soon as I did it, but that didn't stop me from unsnapping the strap securing it in the holster. "I seen one, David," Jonas said after another pull from the bottle, fixing me with those piercing eyes. If Tommy hadn't stopped me, I'd have gone right out after Levi, and that damn thing was waiting for me. It knew I was gonna rush out after him, and it was just waiting for me. "What was?" I asked, barely above a raspy whisper. Jonas handed me the bottle and I took a swallow. "What did you see?" Jonas paused, trying to find the words. It was tall, 9 feet if it was an inch. Thin, gaunt is a better word. Almost sickly. Seemed like it wasn't more than skin and bones. It had this great misshapen head that was too big for its hunched body. And its hands were malformed and skinny as the rest of it, with fingers as long as my forearm, all twisted and distorted. It was like someone had taken all the wrong parts and tried to make a living thing out of them. But it moved. David, Jesus, help me. But it moved like lightning, like a coiled snake. You'd swear a thing that tall and skeletal wouldn't be able to move like that. But when it saw Tommy holding me fast, keeping me from dashing off into the storm, it made this god-awful hissing moan, like the last breath from a dying man. Like it was furious that I'd been snatched back from its grip. Like it was hungry. Without a thought, I swung my hand cannon up and emptied it at the thing until the hammer just clicked on spent cases. It just stood there, watching me with empty eye sockets, not even registering my gunshots. Then it was gone into the darkness, just a flicker of motion that was too fast to track. Holy shit, Jonas, was all I could say at first. I don't understand. Why didn't it come for you? If it was right there, why didn't it attack? Jonas shook his head and shrugged. I'm not sure. Exactly. I had the impression that it wanted to but couldn't. Like it wasn't made to stand in the world of men. Maybe it couldn't come up onto the porch or into the bunkhouse. Maybe it needed me to come to it, the way Levi had. As you'd imagine, me and Tommy didn't get any sleep after that. He'd herded me back inside and shut the door, moving a chair in front of it and sitting there, like he was worried I'd try to go after Levi again. He smirked a little bit at this, though there wasn't any real amusement in his eyes. There wasn't any chance of that. I can tell you. You know me, David. You know I'm not one to back down from just about anything, even out here. But it would have taken old Lucifer himself on my ass to chase me out into the storm that night, out into that darkness. I nodded slowly at him, considering his words carefully. Did you ever find Levi? I asked reluctantly. Jonas turned his attention back out into the heavy rain and fell silent for a bit. I could see his mind was working, sifting through old memories. I hated to prod him on it, but I needed to know the rest. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up and the storm had blown itself out, me and Tommy threw our things on the horses and set out to look for him. It wasn't hard to follow where he'd gone, where he'd been taken. I mean, the tall grass had been flattened in a straight line, like something heavy had been dragged through it in the night. We followed it all morning, moving towards the foothills. When we reached the fence line, we found a bit of bloody cloth hung up on one of the barbs. It looked like a piece from his shirt, caught up and torn as he was dragged through the fence. The horses couldn't cross there, so we tied them off and went on by foot, back into the trees and up into the hills. It was tough going. The ground was muddy and soft from the rains, but that just meant we were able to follow the trail without too much trouble. Jonas turned an eye to me. It's strange, other than the path made by something being dragged along. There were no prints. Anyway, about an hour after we started into the trees, we came across a pool of black water, maybe 20 feet across, smooth as glass and with a kind of an oily sheen to it. I have no idea how deep it was, but we couldn't see the bottom, couldn't see if it even had a bottom. It was bordered all around by field stones. There wasn't a real clearing or anything like that. It just sat there in the middle of the woods on a bit of level ground. The trees grew right up to the edge of it, though the ones closest to that black water were twisted and diseased looking, all gray and withering. Another pause as Jonas took a drag from his cigarette and washed it down with a swallow of whiskey. Tommy spotted the bones first. He always had sharper eyes than me, never missed a thing. On the far side of that black pool stretched out what remained of a man, stripped down to bleached bones. He continued, and shook his head in puzzlement, like he was still trying to figure it out. It was just the upper half of a skeleton. I guess the rest was somewhere at the bottom of that inky hole. It looked like it was trying to claw its way out from the water, arms all outstretched and reaching. Bones? I replied, not understanding. Jonas looked at me a moment, the corner of his mouth pulled up in a wry grin, almost a grimace. Really, that faded as quick as it had come. Tommy may have spotted the bones first, but I spied that familiar gold tooth still stuck in that bleach-white skull right off. He fell silent again, and I felt like the story had run its course. After a few more minutes of nothing but the falling rain and rolling thunder, Jonas stood from his chair and moved to the doorway, handing me the half-empty bottle as he passed. "I think I'm off to bed. Been a long day and I'm weary. Think I've talked enough," he said. He paused and fixed me with a firm eye. "Don't you go wandering. David, not tonight. Keep these floorboards under your feet." "Why here?" I responded with a quick nod, a combination of assent and a good night to my friend. "Good man." Jonas returned the nod and gave me a quick pat on the shoulder as he passed. He'd just stepped a foot through the open doorway when he stopped, his head tilting to the side and brow drawn low. His narrowed eyes found mine, and I saw that same haunted look as before. "Did you hear that?"